The main character holds the guy in her arms and asks him to open his eyes. The girl asks why he saved her at all, because she understands that it simply doesn't make any sense. The lady, her eyes filled with tears, realizes they can't be called family. After all, she ignored him, and he sacrificed his life for her, and she realizes it's too late for regrets. The eldest daughter of Count de Launches Lumina, Lou Launches, is the product of a heartless marriage. After her mother's funeral, her father brought into the family an illegitimate son from his mistresses, as well as the mistress himself. The girl was uncomfortable watching all this. All attention was focused on the boy, as everyone flocked to him, and she felt like a scapegoat, not being seen as part of the family. One day, when the parents were returning home after a banquet, the father and stepmother died in an accident. The priest addresses all those present and asks them to treat death with care in order to honor the memory of Count and Countess Launches and return their souls to the hands of the Lord. The brother and sister watched this funeral in silence and tried to hide all their sadness. At this time, relatives were saying among themselves that it was an accident and that only young Mr. Endymion had survived. The woman says that these children are still so young and asks who will run the family now. The uncle approaches the girl and tells her that she will now become the head of the family. He said this as the funeral was drawing to a close, identifying himself as her maternal uncle. The man insists that she, not the boy Endymion, is the true heir. Lumina asks what will happen if she transfers the position of head of the family this way. My uncle says that after my mother's death, she was treated like a nobody. He thinks it's obvious she'll be the first to be disposed of. The man says he doesn't want his niece to be treated this way, and he says this for her own good. The main character says she understands her uncle, but insists it's not her decision to make. He suggests she not worry and simply trust him, believing that only she is capable of becoming the head of the family. Hearing this, the girl was surprised, as she reflected that she had always lived in her late mother's shadow, and she had been subjected to all sorts of abuse, and these words simply shocked her. Much has changed since then. Endless wealth and the attention of men have appeared, and also complete freedom of action. Taking advantage of her position, Uncle Joseph began to take her to gambling houses. Counting on luck, he always took her with him, and also taught her to play cards and games of chance. Due to family matters, the main character simply did not have time to worry about her younger brother Endymion. Lumina quickly fell into the trap of entertainment, just as Joseph had intended, and very soon she began to suffer from hallucinations, unaware that she was sliding into an abyss. Time flew by quickly, and the girl became quite grown up, and even completely forgot about her vigilance, and also did not pay attention to the people who protected her. The young lady screams and asks the men to let her go. Uncle says it's their crown jewel, and suggests they take better care of it. Then he asks, what if the price drops because of the scratches? Lumina asks her relative what he's doing, and claims she agreed to a marriage of convenience. Joseph tells the girl that she is a legionnaire creature who has incredible abilities, and such creatures are no different from people. But when using abilities, their appearance changes. Uncle asks if she knew this. He explains that even sister didn't tell him about such important things before she died. Considering that legionnaires usually manifest their abilities before the age of 5, he believes she probably hasn't fully awakened her power yet. Joseph tells her he's lucky the price is quite high. Then he asks if she knows their family's financial situation. The main character asks, surprised, if he's going to sell her. Then, with a squeal, she asks if he thinks he'll get away with it. The girl insists that she's the head of the family, and her uncle agrees with her, then smiles and says she's a pathetic semblance. He says it was agreed upon by all the relatives, and even if she disappears, no one will worry. So he suggests she not even think about it. Joseph informs her that her new master will take care of her, and therefore tells her not to even think about dying. Hearing this, Lumina thought she needed to escape and get out of here quickly, but she realized her strength was completely exhausted. Uncle says it's a good thing they pumped her full of medication because she can't even move. Hearing this, the girl was surprised, and she understood why her body was like this. Joseph tells the servants not to leave any bruises on her. Suddenly, the young lady was blindfolded, and she realized this was the very essence of despair, and she wondered what was happening. The girl thought that this might be her end. She wondered why she had been born into V'ete, this pitch darkness. Suddenly, the girl felt someone touch her hand and then tell her to run faster. Hearing this, the main character wondered if she had really been mistaken for someone else. Lumina looked at the boy, who was covered in red liquid. The brother told the girl to run as fast as she could, believing his role in protecting her was over. The moment her free brother Endymion lost his life force, she gained healing abilities. The uncle she trusted betrayed her, and the brother she ignored saved her life. And so the girl regrets being so rude to that guy. Lumina wanted to turn back time, and she thinks he saved her in vain. The girl sustained wounds while trying to save Endymion, which after a while began to cause pain. And then she thought she herself would die, just thinking that the legendary Legion of Healing really did exist. A male acquaintance says, "It seems the poison's effects were too prolonged, and therefore the process cannot be reversed. Her brother is seriously injured, but thanks to his healing abilities, he saved her life." Hearing this, the main character doesn't understand what he's talking about. The man tells her that with such strength, she could have saved his son too. Then he touches the girl's eyes and says, "It's too late." The stranger asks why she can't seem to come to her senses. He also asks if she even wants to live. Lumina thought about how she wanted to live and save Endymion, who died because of her foolish choice, and then take revenge on whoever betrayed her. The man says he thinks the girl is determined, and so he decides to give her another chance. But in exchange, he'll take her heart, which she'll give to him. The protagonist opened her eyes and was surprised, as she had been at her parents' funeral at the time. She felt as if it was happening again. When the women saw Madame Valencia, they wondered what this child had done to deserve such treatment. However, another woman said, "They don't need to interfere, because this girl is the eldest daughter of Count Lances." Suddenly, the little girl heard pain on her cheek, and she didn't understand what happened and thought that maybe she was sleeping, because after the words of that man, everything was in a fog. The main character doesn't understand what happened at all and how she ended up in this place, which she had already been to. The aunt asks the girl why she's not herself and what she's thinking about. The woman, screaming, asks why she's staring at the wall. Lumina realized her aunt had slapped her in the face, and everyone around her was watching with interest. And the funeral was the same as when she was 12. And then the main character realized that she had returned to the past. The aunt turns to the girl and says that the children can only be brought to their senses with a slap on the back of the head. At this time, the girl thought that she reminded her of her mother, and then she raised her hand and hit her aunt in the face. However, the woman hadn't even imagined such a turn of events. Then, screaming, she asks what this bastard is doing. The young lady thought that if she really had returned to the past, she was no longer going to be a scapegoat. The girl says that it sounds like a slap in the face. It might bring her to her senses, and she thinks that it would be just right for her aunt to come to her senses. The protagonist recalls that Aunt Valencia always hated her and tried to seize the family's wealth. Therefore, she believes she, too, was involved in her death. Lumina reflects on how not only her aunt, but all adults are blinded by money and are willing to sacrifice an innocent girl, and death means nothing to them. The young lady wondered who knew that she would be disposed of without a word. Auntie asks the little lady if she's gone crazy. Lumina says she definitely is, and wonders how Auntie could have figured it out right away. The main character thought that she didn't want to live like this anymore. Aunt Valencia asks if she's putting on airs and thinking she'll become the heir. However, the girl doesn't answer, and Aunt Valencia, screaming, asks who she's talking to and if she thinks she can handle it without help. Valencia, screaming, says that she will not forgive her even if she crawls on her knees. Hearing this, the girl realized she didn't want any help from these terrible people, and she believed she could manage just fine without their help. Lumina saw her brother and thought that they had finally met. The girl turns to the guy and says that, of course, the circumstances are not the best now, and thinks that it would be better for her to put everything in order now, since she thinks that her brother is quite smart for his age. Endymion is only 10 years old, and the young lady thought about what must have happened after the accident. He was very scared. The main character recalls that her parents didn't love her at all, but they were kind to her brother. Lumina extends her hand to the boy and says she wants to try to get along with him. And then she thinks to herself that they both understand their situation perfectly well. She believes that if they continue to fight, it will only arouse more suspicion. The girl understands that this may seem suspicious, but everything will become clear with time, and she believes that while others may not understand, Endymion is not one of them. The young lady thinks that, in this way, she will repay her debt to her family. The little girl looked out the window where the candle stood and realized it wasn't a dream. She said she never thought she'd end up in that attic again. The main character recalls that the man she saw before his death seemed unfamiliar to her, but now understanding comes to her. This man is the head of the ducal family, Lucius von Hart. He is the most famous legionnaire and the highest-ranking member. He is also considered the main culprit in the massacre of the legionnaires. Lumina doesn't know why he did this to her. She wonders why she met him in particular. The young lady thought about what must have happened to Endymion. Rumors had already reached her that she was being held captive by her relatives. The girl remembered the man and thought that this still didn't explain anything, but she didn't understand why he said she could have saved his son, and she believed he had turned back time. The protagonist understands that the legionnaires are special and believes he must have done something to her heart, and perhaps he, like her, remembers the future. Lumina considers it a blessing that she can now freely use her powers, as she was unable to do so in the past. The young lady thought that she first needed to meet with Duke von Hart. The gambling house was a hotbed of rumors, and the day after revealing her Legionnaire's gift, she was there. However, the young lady does not understand why her migraines have become worse lately. The lady who was sitting at the table asks Sudarev if they heard that the heir of Duke von Hart could not cope with his power and lost it. The man says it seems his own talent almost killed him. Hearing this, the main character thought that the Legionnaires were very powerful creatures with supernatural abilities. In any family, even a non-noble one, a child could be born with the gift of a Legionnaire and awaken his power. The Legion's gift is very rare, but it awakens this power. A person must register and receive the status of a Legionnaire so that the state can use their power for military purposes. Among the Legionnaires, Duke von Hart was considered very powerful. The young lord says he's heard of the Duke's son's misfortune many times before. He believes the boy has a terrible fate, as he will become infirm due to the one who lost control of his power. A blonde-haired man reports that they say, the more the Legionnaires use their abilities, the closer they are to mental illness. And many of them go mad to varying degrees, and some even experience physical changes. The woman says that, however, it's rare for both father and son to be Legionnaires, and she would never have imagined it would end so tragically for them, since she believes that his son is now, essentially, a disarmed Legionnaire. At this point, the main character doesn't understand why her head hurts so much, and the pain causes her to lose consciousness. A girl sitting at a gambling table suddenly falls to the floor. After a while, she sprouts wings. The gentleman who saw this realized that Countess Lanches was a Legionnaire. Lumina realized that it was then that her uncle learned of it. The girl understands that a neutralized Legionnaire is one who has lost his powers. However, he retained the outward characteristics of a Legionnaire, so neutralized Legionnaires were secretly sold to influential people for a huge price as exotic creatures. And this is exactly how she was sold. Uncle says that his sister died without telling him this important secret. Hearing this, the main character thought that it was unlikely that her mother would have told him about this. The little girl understands that her mother was the only one who knew, and she did not even tell her father, Count Lanches, that she was a neutralized Legionnaire. The main character recalls that she then approached her mother with a bouquet of flowers and said that so many of them were blooming in the garden. However, her mother didn't even pay attention to her words, and says that even when she wasn't even a month old, her father continued to run to this disgusting woman. The little girl was surprised to hear this, but the woman continued to tell him that he had married her. Then she asked how he could have betrayed them. A woman approaches her daughter and asks if she has seen the child that this woman bore him. She says that he is a copy of her father. Then the mother asked her daughter why she didn't look like him at all. And after these words, she touched the girl's face and squeezed it very hard. Lumina considered that perhaps circumstances required her to conceal any problems concerning herself, and she realized that, whatever happened, only she and he knew. Suddenly, the girl heard someone calling her and thought that it was a familiar voice. The uncle turns to the little girl and says, "It's good that he found her and offers to talk." At that moment, she thought that he should go to hell. Despite the funeral having already taken place, the relatives still hadn't left their home. They expressed a desire to stay for a couple more days, ostensibly to honor the memory of the dead. Only then did the main character begin to understand that this wasn't why they stayed. Yosef asks the little girl where she's rushing off to. Uncle asks how she ended up wearing that. Then he tells her she looks like she stole it from a passing beggar. Hearing this, the main character thought she could tolerate him a little longer. Yosef says he certainly expected this after his sister's death, but he thinks it seems the Count and his wife have completely abandoned her. Lumina says that this is the only dress she has and asks if it really looks that bad. The uncle turns to the little girl and says he has something to talk to her about. Then he asks if they can go to the dressmakers later and order a dress for her. Hearing this, the girl smiled and said she was so happy. Then she asked if she really could have a new dress. She realized he wanted to use her for his own ends, and she thought that now she would simply ruin him with her whims, and that would be the end of it. When they arrived at the clothing store, Lumina pointed with her finger that she liked every dress. Upon hearing this, the salesman said that the young lady had very refined taste. At this point, the little girl became curious about how much it would all cost. The uncle explains to the girl that he can't handle such a bill. Hearing this, she asks in surprise if he'll really ruin him. Lumina says she thinks she forgot because she thought she could do anything, and then apologizes. Yosef says she doesn't need to apologize because he's her uncle, and so she should have everything she wants. Hearing this, the main character thought that this was just a golden opportunity to ruin this family, since she realized that she herself did not even need these dresses. The little girl says she's so glad she has such a wonderful uncle to rely on, and at that moment, she thought about taking off his rose-colored glasses and preparing for bankruptcy. Dear uncle. Lumina opened the door and looked out into the courtyard, wondering if anyone was there. She recalled checking this exit many times. The little girl thought that since she, the uncle, had already emptied her wallet, she needed to find Von Hart's artifact before she was caught, since she believed that he was somewhere nearby. The guy turns to the girl and says that he finally found her, and asks where she has been. Hearing this, the main character does not understand who he is and looks at this black-haired guy in surprise. The boy grabs the girl's hand, then hugs her and says he's coming here. He hides her and asks her to keep her head down. At this point, Uncle calls Lumina and asks where she ran off to. He thought there would be no problems with her, since she had always been so obedient, and he doesn't understand why she ran away now. Yosef saw the black-haired boy standing next to Lumina. He thought he looked like an evil mage. He couldn't understand why a girl would approach such a bad boy. The little girl asks if the man has left. The stranger says he has. Then he tells her not to look around like that, as he thinks they'll be suspected. At this time, the girl looked at him and did not understand who he was and why he helped her. A stranger tells her that if she wants to look at him, she should look straight at him and not be shy. Then he insists that if she has anything to say, she should say it. She asks why he helped her. Then he asks if he's also hiding from pursuit. The girl asks if he hugged her so he wouldn't get caught. Then she says that if so, they're like accomplices. The boy agrees with the girl and says he helped her because she's in a similar situation. Then he asks where she's going. Hearing this, the main character thought about what it meant, that he only pretended to know her in order to help her. Lumina thanks him and explains that he saved her and asks where he's going. He replies, "Nowhere," and suggests they avoid that man. She doesn't understand what he's talking about. Suddenly, the boy takes off his cloak and puts it on the girl. He then explains that if she walks around like this, people will figure out she's an aristocrat's daughter lost on the street. The little girl asks how he is. The young gentleman replies that he can handle it, but if they are suddenly separated, she needs to be as inconspicuous as possible. Therefore, he suggests that she take her cloak and leave discreetly. At this point, the main character thought that even though this guy was harsh, he still helped her, and she couldn't believe she'd accidentally met such a person. Lumina says she doesn't know where he's going, but she wishes him luck and thanks him again for his help. And yet, she doesn't understand. Somehow she feels like this meeting is the beginning of something good. The salesman heard the door open and thought that the first customer had arrived, and then he greeted her and asked in surprise why the girl had come here. The man asks if she's looking for her parents. Then he says that, unfortunately, there's no one here except flies, so she definitely won't find them. The little girl saw a ball on the table used to identify legionnaires. She thought this must be a very unusual tavern, and she realized she'd probably come to the right place. Lumina says she needs Mr. Calvados. Calvados is the name of an apple brandy, but few know that it's also the nickname of Duke von Hart. The salesman tells the girl he won't sell her anything without her parents' permission. Hearing this, she wonders if he'll play dumb. The little girl tells her uncle to think for himself, that if she needed alcohol, she would say, "Mr. Calvados," as if it were a person, and she thinks it seems he's forgotten how to select proper workers. The saleswoman replies that she doesn't know who told her she could meet him there. Then she insists that a little girl has no business there. The main character asks what if she's a Legionnaire? He replies that Legionnaires don't go here, but to the office to register. Then he asks if she knows how many people claim to have the gift of a Legionnaire. Lumina explains that she came to Mr. Calvados because she doesn't want to register her gift. She then reveals that she has the gift of healing and has heard that he is extremely interested in people like her. Hearing this, the seller asks in surprise who could have told her such a thing. The girl thought he was being very stubborn and that nothing could be done. And then she touched the ball that was on the counter. The man told the young lady that it wouldn't do any good anyway. The little girl insisted that she would prove to him that she was not an imposter. And then the balloon cracked and butterflies flew out. The salesman saw it and thought it was incredible. Lumina pointed at the ball and asked in surprise why it broke under his touch. A few minutes later, the man made the girl a children's drink. When she took one sip, she thought it was too sugary and assumed he thought children only liked sweets. The main character realized his attitude had changed immediately upon learning she was a Legionnaire. He immediately offered her tea and all sorts of treats. The salesman asked the girl not to go anywhere and to wait for him there. Hearing this, she thought he was probably going to get Hertz von Hart, and she didn't expect him to close the store right then and there. Left alone, the little girl thought that this was impossible, that she was much stronger than she had imagined. Hart entered the room. Looking at him, the main character does not understand what these ridiculous glasses are for. Seeing the girl, the Duke asks in surprise where she got this cloak. At this time, the young lady thought that he also remembered his life before returning. The little girl replies that it was a gift. He asks who. Hearing this, she doesn't understand why he's questioning her. The salesman says he doesn't think there's any need to push her too hard, since she's just a child, no older than 10. The girl says she's 12, and therefore says there's no need to treat her like one. The main character thought that the Duke thought that she was just a child. Von Hart explains that his son is about the same size, so he was just asking. At this point, the girl began to wonder if the Duke didn't recognize her. She believed that if he remembered her past life, he would have persuaded her to leave. The young lady believes that the Duke she met then was desperate to save his son. And even if he doesn't remember his past life, that doesn't change anything. The Duke tells the little girl that he's proposing a change of location. And at that moment, she thinks she shouldn't hesitate. After all, this man has power and she follows him. And at that moment, she thinks, damn Joseph and his family. Very soon, they came into a small room to assess its capabilities. The Duke says he'll ask her again if she possesses the Legionnaire's healing powers. The girl assures him it's true. The main character looked at the room and thought that she didn't even know that there was such a secluded corner here, where even a whisper could not be heard. Fonda Hart asks if she could demonstrate her abilities. Then he takes a knife and inflicts paralysis, saying he did it on purpose. Hearing this, the young lady thought that he wanted to test her skill right away without discussion. Lumina remembers that when she thought about Endymion, who was on the verge of death, her abilities began to manifest themselves. And she knows that she never wanted to save someone sincerely before. The gentleman and his assistant looked at the palm and saw that the wound had disappeared. And he thought what an incredible feat this was. The Duke says he feels like she's taking on other people's wounds. Hearing this, the protagonist thinks she's been exposed, as he noticed her hand. He asks to what extent these abilities can be applied. The little girl replies that this isn't the limit, but she can only teach ordinary people, or even Legionnaires. He asks what about sick people? The girl understands that if her abilities were advanced, she would have saved Endymion in her past life. Lumina looked at the gentleman and did not understand why he was looking at her like that, and wondering what he thought about her abilities not being so healing. Meanwhile, the main character wipes her palm and reflects that such wounds heal quickly. And despite being poorly fed and raised, there are no scars left, and her wounds healed faster than others. The little girl realizes that in the past, no one really cared. The Duke turns to the girl and says she has an unusual ability, and he doesn't understand the point of all this. The gentleman claims she has unique abilities, but that's all he has to say and suggests she return home. Hearing this, the girl asks if they'll just part ways like this, and she realizes that if she leaves, everything will simply fall apart. The protagonist believes she must convince him at any cost and make it so he can't refuse. She turns to the Sir and says, everything is fine. Lumina reports that the stronger a Legionnaire is, the more susceptible they are to corruption due to their strength. She also believes that if they're unlucky, they could even die. because healing isn't limited to minor wounds. The girl claims she can save Duke von Hart from his wrath. Hearing this, the Duke asks what she's even proposing. The young lady tells him she can save his son's life and says he's heartless. Then she asks if he loves his son. Hearing this, the gentleman says that means she can do much more. The main character says that an indifferent father wouldn't even know his son's clothing size. And she says that he's the kind of man who's willing to sacrifice his life when on the brink of death. The Lord asks her what she wishes for. The little girl replies that she simply wishes to use the Duke's power until she reaches maturity. She then explains that her mother and father recently died in an accident, and her younger brother is the only direct heir. Therefore, she believes that feuding between the relatives is inevitable. Lumina says she wants her brother to accept the inheritance calmly. The Duke says that's why it's happening. It takes time. The girl says that when she grows up, everything will settle down. And for now, he offers to protect her and assures her that he will definitely not regret choosing her. After meeting with Duke von Hart, she returns safely to the Count's estate. All day long, Joseph scolded her and tried to find out where she had been, but she barely noticed. However, Joseph's incessant berating her seemed pointless. The little girl knocks on her brother's door and asks if she can come in. Once she's inside, she asks if he's feeling better. Endymion replies that everything is fine, and then asks in surprise why she came. The young lady looked around the room and saw that there were flowers and toys all around, and it was also surprisingly clean, and it seemed to her that relatives often came here. The girl asks if his relatives often visit him. The boy replies that they do. Hearing this, she thought he was as terse as ever, and Endymion hadn't changed since the day they first met, and she thought that even when he should be careful, he was quite meek. The main character doesn't understand why she harbored such hostility toward him. Then she asks the guy if he'd considered the inheritance. The boy thought for a moment, then replied that he didn't even know. She asked if his relatives were forcing him to lead the family, and asked if he'd ever thought about it. My sister says she was offered the same thing. She thinks her relatives are looking for a suitable puppet, and they probably think children are easily influenced. The girl says that if she were older, she wouldn't pay any attention to her relatives at all. Then she says he would never accept such offers. However, she believes the choice is his. Endymion asks why she's telling him this. He also asks if she's upset with him. The boy says he always thought she hated him. At this point, the protagonist reflected on how she never trusted her family, as she had no good memories of them. The second mother constantly complained that her father ignored her. This woman was obsessed with her biological father, but in the end, she simply got stabbed in the back. The protagonist reflected on how she had to lift the veil from her eyes when a glimmer of light appeared in the pitch darkness, and she believes she will never forget that time. Lumina replies that she doesn't hold a grudge against him. Then she says that he's the only person in the world who feels close to her, and that's why she's decided to stop hating him. The boy asks his sister if she wants to inherit their father's inheritance. She replies that she has no interest in that, and from now on, she believes in honesty and fairness. Hearing this, the brother was surprised, since he rarely communicated with his sister anyway. The next day, when Endymion came to her room, he asked why she lived in such conditions. The girl replies that it's because she showed sincerity. However, the boy insists that his sister is his legitimate daughter, and he should give her a better room, so he suggests she move out of her room as soon as possible. Hearing this, the young lady doesn't understand when he became so caring, or even worried about her. The maids enter the room, and the little lady announces that she has a guest, and they are showing her in. Hearing this, she is surprised and asks who the guest is and why he came so suddenly. The maid announced that Duke von Hart wanted to meet her. Hearing this, she thought that her brother shouldn't worry, since she would soon be moving out of the attic anyway. When the girl went down to the lower floor, she saw the Duke sitting at the table, as well as her aunt and uncle. The little girl greeted them. Then she said she was the eldest daughter, and her name was Lumina de Lanchez. The Duke tells her to sit down, and the aunt smiles and says that she didn't know that Madame knew the Duke. The protagonist thought that Duke von Hart was handsome, and she couldn't believe Joseph and Therese were so surprised. She expected them to jump at the opportunity. The girl looked to the right and saw a lot of boxes against the wall. Then she asked what they were. The Duke replies that they are her gifts, and then explains that there was no time to get flowers, and so he decided it would be better to buy her gifts. Teresa says he cares so much about Lumina, and her uncle asks how his girlfriend met the Duke. He suggests he must have known her biological mother. Duke von Hart announces that he is her guardian. Hearing this, Joseph is surprised and then asks what guardianship. He replies that he has never heard of anything like it. The gentleman asks if they really think Duke von Hart's family is only good at talking. He claims he cares neither about time nor manners, since he intends to take this child under his wing. The Duke says that she is so smart that he even wanted her to become his son's wife. Hearing this, Lumina was surprised. She became interested in what her son himself thought, and why not ask her too? Auntie says their Lumina really is good. Hearing this, the girl thought it was just a joke. Well, that still makes her a little awkward. The gentleman says he needs to be aware of the conditions in which Lumina grows. Then he asks if they could show her to her room after dinner. Teresa says she's a girl, and therefore considers it impolite to peek into her room. Hearing this, the little girl says it's all right, and she thinks the Duke will think she's a bit old. And if that doesn't bother him, then she doesn't mind. The aunt looked at the girl and showed her fist, and thought that she was saying something that she shouldn't have said. At this point, the young lady thought that she was sure Teresa knew how the Duke would react to her room, and if she told him about her upbringing, she would get into trouble, and she believed she needed to take matters into her own hands. When they arrived at the little girl's room, the Duke asked if it was a playroom or a dressing room. The young lady replied that it was her bedroom. The gentleman says that the estate is quite large, and then asks if there really wasn't a better room available. Hearing this, the protagonist looked at her relatives and thought about how their expressions were changing more and more, and she thought they were afraid the Duke would notice their terrible behavior. The girl thinks they're mocking her and then trying to cover it up. Teresa turns to their girlfriend and asks if she's very worried about Duke von becoming their guardian. The aunt turns to his lordship and explains that this is merely a punishment room. Then she informs him that the little girl has a separate bedroom. She asks if his child is always obedient. Then she informs him that Lumina goes here when she's naughty. Teresa turns to the girl and says that she knows that she wants more attention, but assures her that she shouldn't lie to her like that. The main character tells her aunt that she's lying so confidently that she couldn't help but laugh. Hearing this, her aunt gets angry and asks why she says she's lying. Then she assures her that she only said what she heard and asks where the lie is. The girl asks if she heard it herself, and assures her that in that case, she shouldn't jump to conclusions about those in question, and asks if she's absolutely certain she doesn't know anything. Teresa asks if she really lived in this room. Hearing this, the protagonist thinks she's now pretending not to know. The girl assures her that she did live here and suggests she take a look around, believing it's impossible not to realize that someone lives in this punishment room. Lumina says she understands her aunt, since she didn't care, because she doesn't know anything, and so she asks to be allowed to take the initiative, since the Duke is her guest. The main character thanks the Duke for agreeing to be her guardian. Gavarit, go. He says she has a family that surprised him. The young lady says she doesn't know a family that doesn't have problems. She says it's her turn now and asks when she can come visit him. He replies, whenever he pleases. At this point, the protagonist reflected on the fact that only 6 years remained until the young Duke's death. She wondered if he had developed any symptoms. The girl thought that in that case, she would have to gradually prepare for her revenge. Then she turned to his lordship and announced that she wanted to ask him for a favor. The little girl asks if she can stay for a couple of days when she comes to visit his son. She explains that she needs time to thoroughly examine the young Duke. She also asks if he minds. At this point, the young lady was thinking that if he refused, she wouldn't know what to do. The gentleman replied that she should do so at her own discretion. Lumina thanked his lordship and said that then she would come with a gift for him. Sitting in the carriage, the assistant looked at the captain, who was sitting very thoughtfully, and asked how it all happened. He replied that this girl was brave, and he was quite impressed. The man says he was planning to take her under his wing anyway. He insists that a gift is a thing, and can't be bought with gold. The Duke replies that he's right, and at that moment he thinks about how legionnaires are often deprived of humanity and warmth. But when Lumina used her ability, a light began to emanate from her body that could melt even the coldest heart. And then, for a moment, the gentleman felt like an ordinary person. The Duke believes that a power that is self-evident is rare and highly coveted, and he immediately felt his own strength, knowing when to step back and when to push harder. The gentleman believes she was willing to negotiate, and today he realized this girl has the ability to be decisive and knows when to use it. And that's why she surprised him, since it's rare to find children like her. The assistant tells his lordship to remember that she's still a child and that suspicion must not be removed from her, as he believes she may be connected to that very incident. Fonda Hart agrees with him and says she's a good liar. He recalls how he asked her if she knew more about her ability than he expected. He wonders if she's ever interacted with the Legionnaires. The girl replied that she had been in contact. The gentleman knew she was lying and yet she was making assertions, but he knew the girl had lived in confinement her entire life, and therefore she had no opportunity to meet the Legionnaire. The Heart Foundation says he's rather surprised by how well she understands her ability. He also thinks there's a lot that's suspicious about it. The assistant asks whether he should continue digging and also asks what his lordship thinks about it. The master replies that he will entrust him with this task again. Brendan Munez is Duke von Hart's lieutenant and a Legionnaire with the ability to change appearance. Brendan says he's a little worried because the target is a man who has lost everything and yet continues to fight. He asserts that he will try not to disappoint the captain. Then he reveals that he forgot to ask if his son, who escaped, has returned home. The Duke replies that he doesn't even know, and if he's back, he's studiously avoiding him even at home. The lieutenant says it's just his age, and then explains that it's a protest against his parents. Brendan believes he may still be reeling from what he saw during the massacre. The protagonist reflected on how much her life had changed since the Duke's visit. The most noticeable change was the new quarters. Lumina thought that this wasn't her first time in this room, and she would have been given this room if she had obeyed Joseph. The protagonist recalls that in her past life, this unsaid news made her happy. But now she has other concerns, and she realizes she needed to rid the estate of unnecessary people. The girl turns to her relatives and says she didn't know her parents were so dear to them. She then says she's so pleased they all remember them fondly. Lumina asks her dear relatives if it's time for them to return to their duties, because her parents told her that grown-ups always have grown-up things to do. The girl asks if they think her parents wouldn't be too happy about them abandoning their duties under the pretext of mourning. She wonders what they think about it. Thus, the main character kicked out the relatives who had been staying with them for too long, under the pretext of mourning. However, these two stoically endure all the reproaches. The young lady understands that Joseph and Teresa are, after all, representatives of the Fan clan, and believes that they cannot be driven out so easily. After the atmosphere in the estate cleared, even the servants, who usually ignored her, began to treat her very kindly. Every day, they brought fresh flowers to her room. The maid told her mistress that, as she had ordered, they had decorated the interior with flowers donated by the Duke, and what could be planted they had planted in the garden. Hearing this, the girl thought that this maid seemed to have greatly enjoyed the task. The main character believes that, unlike her stepmother, she isn't as picky. Many of the maids, however, want to curry favor with her. She understands they must, and they're happy to have much less work. Lumina turns to her maid, Samantha, and thanks her for always helping her. She thanks her ladyship and explains that it's her duty. The girl didn't push them away. She asked if they were being paid well and whether she should speak to the butler about it. The maids objected, saying they were already very well paid and there was no need for that, as they were always paid on time. The protagonist realized she needed allies in this estate, and she realized that the maids, who wouldn't befriend her because of her past, would distance themselves even further, and it would become obvious who would betray her. The young lady believed she was simply a source of discord, caught between these people, and she thought about letting them wait for her to sprout. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, when all the maids had gathered, one of them, the green-haired one, turned to Samantha and said that she had been the one who had bullied her the most. Then she asked if she wasn't ashamed of fawning over her now. Samantha asks when this happened. The maid asks who released the rats from the attic into the young lady's room. And then, screaming, she says she has no conscience. The black-haired maid says she remembers it, because back then, the young lady ran to complain to her mother, who accused her of lying and beat her. She asks who else gave her the ointment for the bruises later. She says it definitely wasn't Samantha because it's not like her at all. Hearing this, the red-haired maid grabs the girl by the hair and asks if she's finished. Then she says, "If anyone's cow were silent, let hers be silent." The maid, screaming, says to let her go, since she is not lying and remembers that on that day, she was among those who ran away from the attic that day. Samantha pulls the maid by the hair and asks if the young lady herself chased the rats away afterwards. The black-haired girl replies that it wasn't her. At this point, the head maid comes in and says it's not the time for fighting. Then she reports that the copper fell down the stairs. Hearing this, the maids were surprised. After all, they did not understand how this could happen. The doctor, after examining the young lady, said she would have to refrain from running for a long time. He then bandaged her leg. The doctor says that if the fracture had happened higher, things would have been much worse. He also advises that the child needs to try hard. Joseph tells the doctor he understands and will monitor her nutrition. The uncle turns to the maids and asks how they could keep quiet about this. He says he didn't even know the staircase railing was held in place by a thread. Joseph says they entered the room without even greeting the doctor. At that point, the maids felt ashamed and apologized. He says he thinks this incident needs to be taken seriously. Uncle says it would be better to fire all the servants. Hearing this, Teresa asks if this isn't too cruel. Of launches faithfully for many years. She understands they made a mistake, but she believes it's impossible to simply deprive them of their livelihood. Teresa thought about how she'd bribed so many of the maids, and therefore she didn't intend to lose them all. Meanwhile, Joseph was thinking about how he wanted to recruit servants loyal to him. The girl, however, wanted them to simply squabble among themselves. The main character believes that whoever wins will benefit her, because she understands it's all part of her plan. The girl thought Joseph would arrive soon, as he needed to convince her as quickly as possible, so she gave the maids a hard time. And everything worked out just as she had hoped. Lumina realized they hadn't been seen in the hallways for some time, and all she could do was suffer. She'd been counting on the maids being blamed for any misfortune that occurred while they were busy. The main character realizes that it was not difficult, just like her shabby room in the past, and these railings were broken. The maid informs Milady that Master Endymion has arrived. Seeing him, the aunt turns to the boy and invites him to join her. And at that moment, she thinks how good it is that he is on her side. The woman turns to the boy and says what she wants him to tell her. But suddenly he interrupts her and turns to his sister, asking what happened to her. Then he approaches the girl and doesn't even pay attention to the woman. Lumina explains that she was admiring the flowers and leaned on the railing, which is why she fell. The young master, surprised, asks where the servant was looking. The girl says she called a couple of times, but they didn't come, and apparently thinks they were busy. The boy asks the servant what they were doing then. Auntie turns to Endymion and explains that Count Melkin now wants to fire all the servants. She then tells the boy that if he thinks this is too cruel, he should speak up. He's a young lord, and they need to know his opinion. The young gentleman replies that the victims here are my lady, and besides, she's the eldest in the family, and they should hear her opinion first. His aunt is surprised to hear this, and he asks what his sister thinks about it. At this time, the main character thought that she had been waiting for a convenient opportunity, and Endymion did not keep her waiting long. Milady says that, as far as she knows, in such cases, after a brutal beating with rods, the culprits should be branded with a hot iron. She believes this is negligence and lack of discipline, and they even have the right to send them to prison for this crime. The girl says that, given their loyal service, such a punishment would be too severe, and instead she wants everyone fired. The servants were surprised to hear this, and Lumina said that she was proposing to fire them without compensation because they were to blame for this incident and there were no recommendations. Samantha ran up to the girl, then fell on her knees and said they'd made one small mistake, and it wasn't fair that they'd all lose their jobs. Then she begged her to complain about them. The red-haired maid says she's already pitied her more than she deserves. The main character whispers in her ear and asks her to remember everything they did to her, taking out their anger on her. She insists they should be grateful they weren't punished to the fullest extent, but were merely fired. The girl says that they could have broken her back, and therefore suggests that the maid leave herself. The next day, Lumina reflected on how quiet it was in the house now, and how there were no more servants. She felt she no longer had to worry about being noticed. The young lady came into her brother's room and thought about the fact that he doesn't want to talk about his leg injury, but judging by how long and hard it is healing, it is something serious. The girl thought that she also had a leg injury, so she believed that it would not be so noticeable if she took on his injury. When Lumina touched the boy, Te felt pain, as if her leg were broken, and she thinks it looks like he has a very serious fracture. And since she suspected, she just needs to be patient for a little while longer. The young lady thought she would quietly leave and no one would notice, but suddenly, a boy grabbed her hand and asked what sister was doing there. Endymion asks what that was, and where that bright light went. The girl insists there was nothing, and she knows nothing. The young lady explains that she simply saw a rat run into his room, and that is why she came to him. The boy heard this, screaming, "What a rat!" At that moment, the girl thought he believed her, but suddenly she felt pain in her leg and fell to the floor. Seeing this, Endymion asks what's wrong with his sister. She, smiling through the pain, says everything is fine, but her legs just suddenly gave way. She asks him to help her up. The brother asks what she did to him, and then says that he feels strange because his legs don't hurt anymore. The boy explains that, although he was asleep, a radiant light awakened him. He opened his eyes and she was standing before him. He helped her up and asked what sister had done to him. At this point, The main character reflected on how she hadn't wanted to reveal her abilities right away, but she believed she could trust her brother. Lumina says she seems to have the gift of the Legion. The boy is surprised to hear this. She says she's shown no signs of it before. She explains that it's probably a congenital anomaly. Endymion says he's never heard of such a thing and thinks it's impossible. His sister explains that her abilities only manifested recently, and she's a unique specimen. Then she asks if he understands that. The boy replies that she's a unique specimen. He understands that. The girl only asks him not to tell anyone about her being a Legionnaire, and about how impressed she was. Her brother said he knew, of course, that if anyone found out about this, she would be in danger. At that moment, she thought, she knew he was smart. Endymion asks if she fell down the stairs on purpose. Then he tells her that now that all the servants have been fired, their aunt has lost all her spies. Hearing this, the girl is once again convinced of his cleverness. The boy asks if she can heal herself. The young lady replies that it's impossible. She then explains that she has a powerful regenerative ability, so she'll feel much better after sleep. A guy hands a girl a box and offers it to her. He says it's a painkiller that will help her cope with the pain. Then he tells her that since she cured him, he no longer needs it. After all, she's his sister, and he wants to help her. Lumina recalls one day seeing rats in her room and screaming in fear. When she ran to complain to her stepmother, she said she was lying and mercilessly beat her with a cane. That day, someone secretly put some ointment for bruises in her room, and the girl thought that maybe it was him. The sister thanks her brother and says that she will get better. When Endymion was left alone in his room, he lifted his pants and saw that there was nothing left of the injury on his leg. The boy understands that such a sudden recovery will arouse suspicion, so he decides it's best to feign illness for a while. For some reason, he remembered the day he'd asked his mother why she treated his sister so badly. He'd claimed there was a rat in her room, though she didn't believe him, but she was telling the truth. The mother tells her son that she's told him this many times, but she'll repeat it again. Lumina's mother took away everything that was rightfully hers, and so it doesn't matter whether she's lying or telling the truth. The woman explains that she's now acting like a mother to her, and therefore has every right to discipline her. Then she insists that everything is as it should be, and everyone knows their place. She asks her son if he understands her now. Endymion heard the girl's cries and thought that he already knew his sister's mother had taken everything from her, but he didn't understand how his sister was to blame. He also wondered why his mother was taking his sister away from him. The boy realizes that the sister even told him she was a Legionnaire and healed him. She also said that he was the only one left for her, and therefore she no longer wanted to hate him. The young master thinks that it is quite fair for his sister to hate him. Early in the morning, Uncle was walking down the hallway, humming his songs. Then he decided to knock on Lumi's door. The protagonist opened the door and asked why he had arrived so early. Joseph replied that he thought she wanted to talk. The uncle asks the lady about how she probably feels completely uneasy without a servant. And so, as their guardian and Endymion's, he must hire them a servant and recommend one. But the girl suddenly interrupts him and says they've already sorted that out. Lumina announces that she's going to visit and explains that Duke von Hart has business with her. Hearing this, the uncle says that in that case, as her guardian, he should go too. Hearing this, the girl objects and says she doesn't want him to go with her. However, the uncle insists and offers to go together. Joseph asks why Milady is so reluctant for him to go. She explains that the Duke only invited her, and if she comes with her uncle, he'll think she's a coward. The main character claims that von Hart hates cowards and liars, and then asks if he wants her to make sure he no longer acts as her guardian. The girl insists that she'll go alone, period. He wished her a safe journey. And at that moment, the lady thought that in fact she just didn't want him to tag along with her. Lumina reflects on how she should have talked to Endymion this morning. And then he showed up. But she thinks maybe her brother is still asleep. The girl understands that the carriage will soon be arriving, and she must already go to the Duke von Hart. But suddenly she saw her brother, who came to her. She says she thought he was still asleep. He asks if she was going to see Duke von Hart. Lumina says that she will be back in a few days, and claims that he does not need to worry about her. The girl said she understood this was an unexpected question. Then she asked if he'd considered joining the academy, and then she thought about how, while she was here changing the future, he needed to find a safe place away from home. The brother says he agrees. She asks why he answered like that without even thinking. Endymion asks if she wants him to enroll in the academy. Then he says that if so, then of course he will. The protagonist approaches her brother and suggests he consider something else, then explains that it's just a suggestion and she respects his opinion. He says he understands and agrees either way. At this point, the girl began to think that maybe he thought she was trying to push him away, and she didn't understand what was wrong with him and why he didn't want to have a good relationship with her. The girl claims she wants to be a good sister to him, and therefore believes that studying is a good future for him. The boy says there's no need for that because he doesn't want to be a burden to her. Endymion said that as far as studies were concerned, he agreed to enroll in the academy because he saw that she needed it. The young lady realized he kept repeating the same thing. The main character thought that he certainly respected her opinion, but she felt uneasy somehow, and she thought it might be because she had changed. The coachman informs Milady that they have arrived at Duke von Hart's estate. Hearing this, the protagonist reflects on how time has flown by so quickly, and that she has finally arrived. Therefore, she believes that now is not the time to think about Endymion. The young lady understands she has more important matters to attend to in this mansion. She believes the Duke is her and Endymion's only salvation from their relatives, but she still thinks he frightens her. The girl greets his lordship and thinks that these glasses do not suit him at all. The gentleman saw that the girl was walking somehow differently and asked what was wrong with her leg. Hearing this, the main character wondered if it was really that noticeable, but she thought she could pretend nothing had happened. Then she says she accidentally tripped it, but insists nothing serious happened. The young lady doesn't understand why he's coming toward her. Duke von Hart takes the girl in his arms and asks why she walked from the carriage alone. Then he asserts that it's completely unnecessary. The gentleman tells the servant to bring the lady a treat. The girl hands the gentleman the box and says it's a gift from her. Then she reminds him that she promised him a gift, and it's a homemade dessert, but a very tasty one. Hearing this, the master asks if she brought dessert with her, and then asks if she thinks he won't be hospitable and feed her. Upon hearing this, the girl objects and explains that she simply loves this particular dessert. That's why she decided to give it to him. The main character asks if he likes it. She claims that they say sharing is better than eating it all alone. At this point, the Duke thought she meant to eat with him and asked if he understood correctly. He then said that perhaps he would join her. Lumina says she'll set aside a piece for the young lord then, as she believes it shouldn't be thrown away. Von Hart tells the butler to bring 2 saucers and tea of the guest's choice. At this time, the gentleman thought that this lady was quite assertive, but she still understands that she is a legionnaire. The young lady watched the gentleman eat and thought about how, while he hadn't expressed any desire at first, he now actually liked it. She thought there was no better food for setting the mood, and so she decided she should get down to business. Lumina says she initially thought about bringing him dessert from their kitchen, but they're having problems at home. He asks what the problems are. The girl thought he knew everything, but was pretending, because she believed he was aware of everything that was happening at the Lanches estate. The main character reports that the entire staff has been fired for negligence, and so, for now, their household is at a standstill, with the estate in disarray. The young lady asks his lordship if he could recommend a good servant. He states that any person he approves of will do. The gentleman says it's not difficult. Hearing this, the girl thought it was wonderful news, since she believed that Uncle Joseph would now be out of work and wouldn't be able to recruit his decoys. The girl asks if the young lord is home. Then she says she would like to begin treatment, and asks if he has left. The gentleman replies that he is staying in his chambers and considers it fortunate that he found him yesterday. He says he will tell her right away that he is not in the best condition, and asks if she is sure she wants to see him. The Duke claims that he needs time to calm down, as he is still recovering from the energy overload. Lumina told him not to worry, as she could handle it. Hearing this, the gentleman was surprised, as he had expected her to be frightened. The young lady says that this is, after all, what she does best. She shouted these words so boldly, and when she entered the young master's room, he pinned her against the wall and asked her what was wrong. At that moment, she thought that she had never imagined that everything would turn out this way. The guy asks if they've met before. The little girl realizes it's the boy she met in the alley, and she doesn't understand what he's doing here, or how this all happened. The protagonist ponders the fact that the Duke, who was supposed to escort her to her room, simply sent a servant, and the servant himself only escorted her to the door, and she realizes she'll have to figure this out on her own. The young gentleman asks her what she's doing here. She doesn't understand why he's come so close to her. Then she asks if he could move away a little. The boy says she used to be more polite. The lady says she now knows who he is, Mesto dla Voda Texta. She reveals that he is the only son of Duke von Hart, Karen von Hart. Lumina says she would like to formally introduce herself and explains that she has come to assist in his lordship's treatment. She gives her name and says she didn't expect to see him here again. Karen says it's clear to him now because he believes she's now his father's servant. It also makes sense to him why they used to see each other. He asks how she dared come in here without permission and calls her a fool. Hearing this, the main character doesn't understand why he's suddenly picking a fight. The young gentleman asks if she thought he'd let his guard down and asks if she should report every step to him. The girl realizes that Duke hasn't told her anything, and that's why he's talking such nonsense. She feels like she's some kind of spy. It's no wonder the situation seems strange to her. Lumina asks the guy if he'll go with her. She also wonders if he'll check to make sure she's doing everything right. At this time, Duke von Hart says that this child hates him, and he will run away as soon as he sees him. The protagonist understands that the relationship between father and son is complicated. She recalls that she sensed this during their previous conversation, but she believes it could have been explained normally. The girl touches the guy's face, thinking he has a fever. She thinks he's in the process of receding, and it must be the pent-up energy from his anger. The young lady takes the boy by the hand and tells him he needs to lie down. Then she leads him to the bed, and he asks, surprised, what she's doing. Lumina touched the guy's head and said that she should help him. He looked at her in surprise, but did not object. Suddenly, the headache that had been piercing his head vanished. The torment that had been driving him mad, and the destructive urge that had made him crave the red liquid, all vanished without a trace, like mist dissipating with the rising sun. The boy hugged the girl, thinking it couldn't be happening, and he was very surprised. Suddenly, the young lady screamed, and he asked what was happening. At that moment, she lost consciousness. Karen asks if she's okay. He thinks she's fallen asleep, and asks if she's doing this on purpose. He says if she doesn't wake up, he'll have to go to her worthless father. The boy grabbed his head and said that this was some kind of madness, and then smiled. Brendan asks the gentleman if the lady is with the Duke now. He replies yes, and says they'll see if she can cure Karen, but they can't predict anything yet. The aide says that, whatever happens, it's best to keep a low profile for now, as the palace is currently conducting investigations. He knows the lady doesn't want anyone in the palace to know about her. The Duke recalls the girl's words about not wanting the palace to know about her abilities because her strength is not yet sufficient to defend herself. She says that if the palace learns of her abilities, she will be sent to the battlefield. The young lady says she doesn't want to go to war, and she hates being used even more. The Duke realizes she's made that quite clear. Brendan says they'll be in trouble too if they're caught, and he believes the imperial family won't let such a special legionnaire slip away. The gentleman says he thinks it might arouse suspicion. Hearing this, the assistant asks, surprised, what suspicions he's talking about. Suddenly, Karen walks into their room. Then he turns to his father and tells him to explain who this girl is, that she's using fucking magic. At this point, the protagonist came to, and when she opened her eyes, she saw a ceiling unfamiliar to her. She realized she had lost consciousness during the treatment. All this time, the Duke sat by the girl's bed, and when he saw she had come to, he asked how she was feeling. The girl wondered if this was Count von Hart's estate. The gentleman says she doesn't have to get up. Then he tells her she's been sleeping for 3 whole days. Lumina heard this and was surprised and asked if so much time had really passed. The Duke explains that she slept like a log, and so he periodically checked to see if she was alive. The girl says she thought she had simply passed out, and that's when she realized he had come to check on her. The gentleman asks her again how she's feeling. The little girl replies that she's doing great and says she's ready to run a marathon. Von Hart asks if he can believe her. Then he says she said she was fine, but there were problems with her legs. The young lady replies that she thought it was normal, since she could walk without it, so there was no need to worry. He asks if she had been treated before. The girl explains that she was treating her brother for now. However, the gentleman says that doctors came and said it would take another couple of months to recover from the accident. Hearing this, the main character thought about what he had already noticed. The gentleman informs her that from now on she will treat only his son. The little girl says she has no one else to show off her abilities to. She thinks she feels like she's forgotten something and finds it hard to believe she can actually cure Karen. The heroine understands that he is quite strong and that his body couldn't resist. However, if she continues to support his strength, he will be able to grow up peacefully, and by that time, he will have learned to control his abilities. The master says this child can save the Karen from being consumed by the Force. He believes that abilities should not be wasted. Lumina says Karen knows nothing about her. Then she asks if he ever told him. The Count replies that he didn't think it was necessary. Hearing this, the girl asks why else. He asks if she heard about the massacre 6 years ago. The little girl replied that she had heard, and at that moment she thought that she didn't understand why he was suddenly bringing this up. The gentleman replied that the boy had seen everything with his own eyes and had been present during the massacre of the Legionnaires. Von Hart says his son said something. The girl asks what it was. He replies that the fair-haired, pink-eyed girl helped him. Hearing this, the main character thought that light hair and pink eyes. Besides her, there is only one other person with such a rare combination of light, and that is her mother, Chloe Launches. Lumina knows her mother had a secret of her own. The Duke says the Legionnaires are possessed, and as soon as they spot someone similar, they cling to them with all their might. Von Hart reports that she resembles this woman, and so he decided there was no need to introduce them beforehand. Hearing this, the heroine thought her appearance wouldn't cause any problems, but the young gentleman became angry when he saw her. His lordship reports that, thanks to her, Karen is learning to overcome difficulties, and so he hopes it will continue to be so. The girl thought about how she now understood what it was like to help others. Then she reminded him that she had said he would never regret it. The Duke says that she must be hungry for 3 days and suggests that she quickly get out of bed, as dinner is already ready. Lumina, sitting at the table, reflected on how long it had been since she'd eaten without worrying about poison. At the Duke's estate, she'd pretended to eat because she was afraid of being poisoned. The girl realizes she's been drugging herself for a long time, but she believes there's no need to worry about that here. After all, they took care of her when she lost consciousness while saving her son, and the Duke watched over her all night. The main character saw the Duke smoking cigarettes while sitting at the table. She believes that inhaling tobacco smoke at the table is also downright poisonous, and she understands that it can't be candy. Lumina asks in surprise if the candy is a cigarette. He replies that his wife hates the smell of tobacco. The little girl knows the Duchess has long since died, but he still thinks about her. The Duke gives the girl a candy and asks if she wants more, not to hesitate to ask or say so. Hearing this, the main character thought that he reminded her of her son, who then said that if he wanted to say something, he shouldn't keep it to himself. Lumina asks if he could recommend a servant for the Lanches estate. She then reveals that she is concerned about what happened in the estate while she was unconscious. The Heart Foundation tells her not to worry, as it has immediately called upon those who can work quickly and keep their mouths shut. It believes they've likely already done their job, leaving no trace. Hearing this, the main character thought that it couldn't be, because she understood that he had not sent a servant to her house. The girl asks what he means by they did their job. He replies that they dusted and so on. The gentleman claims he guarantees that when she returns, she won't find a single speck of dust in the Lanches estate, and the staff will be minimal. The young lady says she understands, as dust needs to be removed. At this time, the girl thought that he was talking about cleaning, but she thought that he sent killers after her uncle and aunt. The Duke asks if she always falls unconscious after using force. He says that last time, everything seemed to go smoothly. Lumina says she doesn't know that yet either. She thinks they'll understand after she treats the young lord again. The young lady reflected that she doubted this herself, because she used her abilities too often. She believed that perhaps she simply couldn't heal external wounds. The main character reflects on the fact that when she treated Karen, it was a completely different feeling. Duke von Hart says that if she needs rest after each treatment, he insists she stay with them, as he believes her visit won't arouse unnecessary suspicion. The girl says that he is only her guardian, and even if he took on the responsibility of providing for her, he will have another family's heir for a long time, and she believes that this could be problematic. The gentleman says that if she agrees to the engagement, all questions will be answered. The lady is surprised to hear this. He asks if she didn't say, and quite confidently, that she wants to take advantage of everything they have, and then asks why she's so surprised. At this time, the main character thought that, of course, she could not help but be surprised, since she believes that she and Karen did not even think to ask about this. Brendan turns to his lordship and apologizes for interrupting, then leans over and whispers something in his ear. Von Hart says he has business to attend to and will be stepping out for a bit. He says they'll discuss the rest later. He tells the girl he's seen her personal maid. After some time, a maid with bright red hair comes into the young lady's room and says that her name is Olivia and she is her new maid. The girl says her name is Lumina and asks her to take care of her while she's here. And then it seemed to her that she knew that name and had heard it somewhere, but she couldn't remember where. The maid asks the young mistress what she would like. The girl replies that she wants to take a walk and asks if she can. Olivia says, "Of course, that's possible," then explains that she's been told she has difficulty walking and asks if she could be carried on her back. Lumina objects and says no, but simply offers to accompany her. The maid tells Milady not to worry, as she won't be in any trouble. However, the girl insists there's no need, explaining that she woke up this morning and found her leg already feeling much better. Olivia tells her mistress that she'll get her ready for a walk in 5 minutes, and a few minutes later, they're already in the Duke's garden. While strolling through the garden, the protagonist recalled her maid saying she was physically strong. It was unexpected to hear such a thing from a maid, and the girl believes that all the Duke's servants have special talents. Lumina believes that, however, this is not so important, and the main thing is that she is a good and friendly maid. Suddenly, the girl heard a scream and became curious. Then she peered behind a tree and saw a young lady asking the guards how they dared to get in her way. The silver-haired girl asks if they want to rot in prison for the rest of their lives. She also asks how they dare treat her like that, considering she's an imperial princess and the fiancé of the young Duke von Hart. Hearing this, the main character was surprised and thought that the Duke had just proposed to her to marry his son. The girl with silver hair is Aravel Piaget Limbrana. The emperor had only 3 heirs. Arail, the beloved daughter of the royal family and the only legionary of royal blood, enjoys great popularity and is beloved by the people. Lumina reflected on how she remembered absolutely nothing from her past life, including her engagement to the young Duke, and she wondered if they had been engaged in secret. The guard turns to Her Highness and says that the gentleman did not say that he was expecting guests. Aravel reports that she didn't notify his lordship and explains that she simply arrived as soon as she learned the young lord had returned home. The lady's attendant, screaming, says that they are in the presence of a person of royal blood and asks how they have the nerve to speak like that. Then she explains that no matter how high the Duke's status at court, he is still only a nobleman. The guards insist they answer only to the Duke. The maid then suggests calling the master. The guards reply that he is not home. In that case, she says to inform the prince that the princess has arrived. Lumina asks the maid if the princess is truly engaged to the young lord. She replies that she doesn't know what Milady's august family has decided. She then informs her master that he has made no decision regarding the young lord's engagement to Her Highness. Olivia says that, to put it simply, the princess has unrequited love for the young lord. Hearing this, the girl doesn't understand whether this is even possible. But she understands that, given the boy's character, it is entirely possible. At this point, the main character noticed that Aravel was looking at her intensely, and she wondered why she was staring at her so intensely. The princess points at the main character and asks the guards who the girl is. She then informs them that, judging by her clothes, she is not from the Duke's family. The princess asks if this girl is visiting the Duke. Olivia turns to Her Highness and tells her that Duke von Hart has taken custody of the young lady. Hearing this, Aravel was surprised and wondered why she knew nothing about this. Then she turned to the girl, called her stupid, and begged her to come over to her. The main character thought that she was, of course, a princess, but she didn't understand what kind of manners she had, since she was talking to her like that. Her Highness says that the princess gave the order, and asks why this girl does not obey. Olivia turned to Milady and asked if she wanted to come over. Hearing this, the girl thought she'd like to ask the maid for help, but if she didn't fix it, the princess would complain to the Duke, and she considers that her situation will only get worse. Lumina considers that she'll have to cope on her own, and then she announces that she's coming. And at that moment, she thinks that she must show what she's capable of. The princess asks the girl her name. The protagonist replies that her name is Lumina, Launches, and she is the eldest daughter of the late Count Launches. Her Highness looks at the young lady and says she's never heard of her before. She asks if she's the heiress to the Count's estate, and if she's a legionnaire like her. The main character objects and says, no. And at that moment, she thought about distracting herself with someone else. Aravel turns to the young lady and says she will do her the unprecedented honor of joining her for tea. Hearing this, the protagonist realizes she's always known this princess was up to something. The little girl thought she was trying to use her to get into the estate, and she believed that if she invited her into the house as a guest, the guards would have no choice but to let her in. The princess asks if she intends to refuse. Lumina replies that of course not, and asks how she could refuse such an honor, and she thinks that she would never be able to quarrel with the imperial family. Therefore, she cannot refuse. Aravel says that today is a great day for her not-so-noble family. Then she says that she allows her to brag to her parents when she gets home. The main character heard, Gavarit, that she hoped her parents would be proud of her, since they had recently died. The princess says it's a misfortune. Meanwhile, the young lady reflects on how she's just an ordinary legionnaire. But it turns out she's empathetic. Aravel says that she demands an explanation from the girl and asks what kind of relationship they have with the son of Duke von Hart, and says that she is almost sure that they do, but suddenly the main character interrupts her and says that she has no relationship at all with this guy. Hearing this, the princess was surprised and asked if it was true, and wondered if she knew him. The princess's maid enters the room and apologizes for keeping her waiting. Then she says she'll pour her some tea. When the maid poured tea for the princess, she deliberately jerked the cart so that the tea spilled on Lumina. At this time, the young master was training. Brendan was watching him. The assistant asked how long he had been there. The knight replies that it's been more than 2 hours. Brandon says he's homesick, or maybe he's trying to catch up. The knight says he can understand the young lord, but he doesn't understand how the legionnaire can endure such a thing, since he thinks this Ash is a real beast. Karen turns to Ash and tells him he needs more rage. She insists he's done slacking off. The red-haired man tells his lord that he's in a completely different mood today. The young master replies, "That's not true at all." Ash Padumal Atom. Padumal, is saying that no matter how much the gentleman tries to deny it, he feels it. Karen asks the guy what's wrong. Ash replies that he felt his mother's gaze for a moment. A servant approaches the Duke and informs him that he has an urgent message. He says it's Princess Aravel, but the young man interrupts him and says he's already been told about it. At this point, Karen began to wonder if she was stalking him because he'd persistently courted her since childhood. But he realized that everything had changed, and he was disgusted even to hear her name. The servant said Lady Lumina had invited her to tea at the estate. Upon hearing this, the master asked how these potatoes could be. Ash thought he was talking about boiled potatoes. The young gentleman turns to the boy and says, "They're done for the day." The red-haired boy asks if he's running away from him again. Karen objects to her and explains that he must save Lumina, otherwise the princess will turn her into mashed potatoes. Ash was surprised to hear this and said he cared so much about her. He then revealed that Princess Aravel hadn't even looked at him after all his attempts at courting her. The young gentleman explains that it's because she resembles her parents, and at that moment, he thinks she'll be jealous even if he tells her the truth, that he first saw this girl when he woke up. Karen reflects on how, ever since his powers awakened, he no longer thinks about her, but he understands that she will now make a scene for him for knowing the Count's daughter. The young master turns to the servant and tells him to take him to them. Idumayada, he says that if the princess starts plotting, it will be serious. At this point, the main character looks at her wet dress and doesn't understand what it was. The maid apologizes and says it wasn't intentional. Hearing this, Lumina reflected that she had taken advantage of Olivia's absence, as her maid had gone after the Duke. The girl believes the princess's maid dismissed all the servants in the house and insisted on serving them at tea, and so she knew it was no accident. And she thinks this is some kind of kindergarten. The maid says that, fortunately, the tea wasn't hot at all. Then she asks if it wouldn't be wonderful to be having tea with the princess herself. At this point, Lumina thought about how she knew the tea party was nothing more than a pretext. They simply wanted her to help them meet the young Duke. The young lady stands up and slaps the maid. Then she says it's a big nuisance. And then she thinks she's underestimated her. She also believes that in this life, she won't fall for anyone's tricks. Lumina explains that she did it by accident too, and then apologizes. And then she thinks to herself that the maid should get ready now, because she'll pay for all her pranks. The main character takes a cup of tea and pours it out. The maid screams and asks what she's doing. The young lady says she seems angry to see the princess humiliate herself without even realizing it. She explains that servants are reflections of their masters and asks if that's true. The little girl says that she is surprised that the princess's maid behaves like this. At this time, a young gentleman opens the door to the room and says that he woke up not long ago, and they were already making noise. The princess turns to Prince von Hart. However, he doesn't even notice her, instead looking at the lady of the dress and asking why she looks like that. He claims she resembles a boiled potato. Lumina smiled and said nothing of the sort. And then she thought about how he'd come without Olivia, and she wondered if he'd been looking for her. The princess, watching them at the time, commented that they were quite close for a first meeting, even for strangers. Then she asked if they had actually met before. The young lady replied that they were already acquainted, and that she'd thought about what she'd said, but she didn't expect them to meet right away. She realized that if she tried to explain, she'd only anger the princess even more. Therefore, she believed it was best not to anger her. Lumina claims this is practically their first meeting, and she muses that, whatever the case, it's best to trust Prince von Hart's wisdom. The main character reveals that she is under the Duke's protection, which is why they have only seen each other briefly. Hearing this, the young gentleman asks what she is talking about. The princess looked at them in surprise and said that the prince doesn't care about others, and asked why he was so concerned about some girl. Aravel asks if she's dear to him. He replies that it's nonsense. Then he asks Her Majesty what she's doing here. Hearing this, the main character wonders if such a thing is appropriate to say to a member of the imperial family. The princess replied that she had done nothing wrong. Hearing this, the girl thought it was rude. The young gentleman looked at the broken cup and asked who it was if not her. Her Majesty replied, Eva. The maid explains it was an accident. Karen tells her to be frank, then insists that if she lies, she'll be left without a tongue, so she won't blab. The maid claims she accidentally dropped the teapot, and then she thinks there's no evidence it was intentional, and she understands what this little girl might do if the princess plays along. The princess reports that she saw the maid deliberately throw the tea set. She then claims that she acted incorrectly and therefore disappointed her. Eva says she would never spill the young lady's tea, and then she claims there's no evidence, and she says it's unfair, and she thinks that's the price she pays for her loyalty. Aravel asks what evidence there can be, and then asks how she dares not believe the words of a member of the royal family. Her Majesty says the maid dared to dishonor her dignity and declares that she no longer has any need of her. Karen turns to the girl and insists that she knows nothing at all, that the princess is terribly careless, and that's why he's glad she's gone. The girl says that her maid did something wrong, and perhaps she ran away because she was afraid of the Duke. Lumina asks the young gentleman why he's speaking outside the door. The maid explains that he feels awkward entering while the lady is washing. The long-haired maid says he even asked her to take care of the lady so she wouldn't catch a cold. Her partner asks if she knew he also told her to be careful because she had difficulty moving. They also wondered if the master even knew how to do that. The protagonist approached the door and thought about how they would see each other many more times, and she thought it would be better to build a good relationship. The guy looked at the girl and asked what was wrong. She said she'd completely forgotten to thank him for his help. He said it was nothing, and claimed that if he kept walking like that, he'd have problems with his legs. The girl asks if he's worried about her. Karen objects and says nothing of the sort. The lady insists it's true. He turns around and says that's not what he meant. The young gentleman says that if she wants a quiet life, then she should not get involved with this family. The protagonist reveals that she's already under the Duke's protection. Karen says that as soon as she feels better, she should ask for everything to be restored. He says he doesn't know why she needs to be his father's servant. The boy tells her not to trust Duke von Hart. Hearing this, Lumina is surprised and asks why. Then he explains that she's not stupid enough to blindly obey. The young gentleman says that on the day of the massacre, his father killed not only the legionnaires, but also his mother. He put her into eternal sleep, and his father did the same. Olivia asks, "My lady, if she's leaving today." She replies that she is, but will meet with the Duke first. Then she reports that she hasn't seen him since this morning. The protagonist glanced at the office door, and it seemed to her that it had been repaired recently. She wondered if anyone had tried to break in. The Duke showed her the letters Joseph had sent. When the girl saw them, she thought there were so many of them. He said her uncle kept sending letters, even though he hadn't answered a single one. Then he said she could read them if she wanted. The girl opened one letter, and when she started reading, she thought that the message was not surprising, since he was upset that his plans had failed. The protagonist asks if anyone else has written to her. The gentleman replies that no one has, and asks if she's expecting a letter. Lumina replies that she's been waiting, and thought her brother would send her a letter, and so she's a little worried, since everything is fine at the Duke's mansion. But Endymion is still locked away among his relatives. The girl announces that she wants to send her brother to the academy. The Duke is surprised to hear this, but the girl insists that her brother is very smart. She promises that he will be the best in his class. She believes he will succeed and will definitely reward her. The main character says that if she sends her brother to the academy, he will finally be free of his relatives. but she understands that she doesn't have much power, and so she hopes for help. Von Hart said it wasn't a bad idea and he'd think about it. Hearing this, the girl smiled and thanked him, telling him he was the best, then hugged him. And then she realized she'd gotten too close and hadn't even realized. Lumina apologized. He insisted everything was fine and said he should be the one thanking her. Then he told her she'd done her job well. Hearing this, the girl was surprised. The gentleman reported that she had treated Karen well, and he had even come to see him personally. At that moment, the young lady reflected on how rarely he smiled and thought he must be very happy. The main character says she's glad the gentleman has become closer to his son. He says it's unusual, since his son hasn't visited him since Iris's death. Upon hearing him, the girl realized the Duchess's name was Iris, and just hearing the name brought a note of tenderness to his voice. Then she recalled the boy's words, who had said his father had killed his mother. The young lady wondered if he could really kill his wife. Lumina remembered she had something for the master. Then she pulled out some irises from her bag and said they were blooming so beautifully in the garden. The girl says that the floral scent will remind her room of its fragrance, but there is nothing in his office. When she looked at the gentleman, she did not understand why he had such a reaction and thought that she had said something wrong again. The protagonist realizes that mending their relationship isn't so easy. Von Hart says he's considering performing a wedding ceremony for Karen. Upon hearing this, the girl was surprised and then asked why he did this all of a sudden. The Duke says he heard she met the princess, and he thinks she's interested. He thinks that since she's a princess, he'll keep an eye on her. He says the suspicions will only grow if she continues to see Karen. The gentleman said, in order to avoid attracting the attention of the imperial family, he believed it would be better to take the position of the Duke's son's wife. Hearing this, the girl thought that the princess would then completely kill her. The Hart Foundation claims that marriage is just a contract, and once the contract expires, they can divorce. The young lady asks the young gentleman what he thinks of this. Then she asserts that there's no point in marriage if he's against it. The main character thought that if he loved Karen, he wouldn't even want to think about it. The gentleman insists that Karen wouldn't mind, and he thinks he'll even be happy if the princess reduces her interest. At this point, the young lady thought about how he was saying he was trying to protect her, but she knew he was simply using her as cover, and she thought it was obviously about self-interest. Lumina understands that the Duke's words have some merit, or perhaps she's considering that if she marries the young master, her frequent meetings with him will no longer seem so suspicious. The girl asks if she'll really become the young master's wife at the Von Hart mansion. At that moment, she thinks about the uproar that will arise if everyone finds out she's a legionnaire. But she realizes that things will only get worse if she becomes the young master's wife. The Duke says he'll pay enough after their divorce. He names the sum, 10,000. Hearing this, the protagonist is surprised and thinks she shouldn't be distracted. Von Hart looked at the girl and asked if that wasn't enough. He told her to let him offer again. He wrote it out and showed the check to the girl. Looking at the numbers, she couldn't even tell how many zeros there were. The main character thought that the amount offered by the Duke was too tempting to refuse. The next day, when they arrived at the temple, the girl thought it was a dream and wondered if she was really going to the vow ceremony, and she couldn't understand whether she had really agreed. The Duke announces that, given the unusual circumstances, the vow ceremony will be conducted in an unusual manner. He asserts that she will make a verbal promise and also sign a contract that binds their souls. The gentleman says he'll need some of her red liquid. At that moment, the girl thought she hoped this wasn't a demon summoning ritual. He says she's come just in time. Lumina says Olivia woke her up and asks what it is. He replies that it's an ancient magic circle. Hearing this, the girl was surprised and thought it was illegal. In the village of magic, in an empire where magical engineering flourishes, it is considered a dead and obsolete art. A form of magic that has survived to this day has absorbed the legacy of the ancients. It was called black magic. The protagonist realizes that black magic is also illegal. The Duke says his late father was very interested in the dark arts, and thanks to what he thinks, he'll be able to successfully perform this ritual. At this time, the girl does not understand what is happening and thinks that the atmosphere is simply creepy. Olivia turns to his lordship and asks him to check the condition of the Grail again just in case. Lumina saw the Karen and Anna hoped he would reject the offer with disgust. She wondered how his father had managed to convince him. A young gentleman asks a young lady if she likes him. At this point, she considers it an inappropriate question for him to ask, but since they are destined to see each other often, she will respond with kindness and understanding. The little girl replies that she likes him. He looks at the girl in surprise and then explains that she's only seen him a couple of times and he doesn't understand how she can respond so easily. At this point, the main character thought about how, of course, she loves money, and she wonders if, even if she likes him, he'll be happy with such a marriage. The guy replies that as soon as she awoke as a legionnaire, she immediately rushed to his aid, and he, of course, is grateful to her for saving him from the princess, but she's not at all like her. Hearing this, the young lady thought that now she understood how the Duke managed to convince him. Lumina says she's more than just his partner. After all, his father is using her affection against him. He's giving him a wolf in lamb's clothing. The young gentleman informs her that when they grow up, they will most likely divorce. He asks if it bothers her that this is worse than a marriage of convenience. The lady replies that she has not yet Yvette a thought about the fact that more than generous alimony awaits her in the future. Karen tells Lumina that she shouldn't be so trusting, because she thinks any guy on the street could cheat her. Hearing this, the girl thinks it's funny, because she thinks he's the one being cheated. The guy reminds her that he asked her not to trust his father, and then says that he too has something with which to threaten her. The lady tells him that people who are truly threatening don't say things like that. Then she tells him that they hide a knife behind their backs and act very friendly, and so she tells him not to even think she'll believe him when he says he's dangerous if he says it openly. A few minutes later, the vow ceremony began, and the girl says that she is Lumina Lanches, agrees to be the mirror of his soul, and vows to look only at him. The guy tells Karen von Hart that he swears with his heart to follow only her. Olivia placed the necklace on the girl's neck and the piercing on Karen's ear. The Duke says that now, when needed, they will always be able to find each other. At this time, the main character thought that she was doing him a favor, but she did not understand why she had the feeling that he had beaten her. The boy with bright red hair says his name is Ash Munez, and that he is honored to serve as her bodyguard. Lumina enthusiastically says she heard about him from the young Duke. He explains that he's just a bodyguard and therefore can freely engage in any conversation in his presence. Olivia explains that this is her son, and if Milady has any problems with the princess, she asks him to convey a message to her. The protagonist looks at them and says they look alike. At this point, the protagonist realized that the Duke would receive reports on everything she said and did, and so she would have to think about what she said. The girl turns to Olivia and says she wants to see her again the next time she comes, and so she asks her not to forget her. The maid asks how anyone could forget such a sweet lady. Olivia tells the girl to to get better soon, and asks her to refrain from running until her leg heals. Sitting in the carriage on the way back, the protagonist suddenly remembered someone very important, and she wondered why she hadn't recognized her right away. The girl thought that Olivia was not a legion, but an ordinary person, a capable adjutant of the Duke, his right hand. Lumina remembered that, in the past, she was the infamous traitor, the transmitter of Lucius. At this point, the Duke says that Olivia has been watching her for a long time. Then he asks what she has to say. Olivia replies that she'll tell his lordship honestly that she's such a little thing. Then she asks if he saw that too when she left, and wonders if he saw her rush to hug her. The woman with red hair says that the girl looks like a fluffy ball of cotton candy. The Duke heard this and, with a cry, told Olivia not to deceive herself, as he thought this was unlike her. He then revealed that she knew his nickname, Calvados. Then he asked if she had anything to add to her file. The woman objects and says she didn't notice anything suspicious. She adds that the girl is simply a child enjoying life, and she doesn't think she has any selfish motives. Duke von Hart says Olivia surprises him. He's never heard her speak so emotionally about anyone. She asks if he thinks that's the problem. The woman says Lady Lances brought him these irises and asks if he likes them. He tells her to be careful with her words. Hearing this, the woman thinks he's been extremely tense lately, and she doesn't understand what's wrong with him. The gentleman says she's no longer Lady Lances, and asks her to remember to call her daughter-in-law by her familiar name. Hearing this, the lady understood the problem. The Duke says Brendan hasn't been in touch, and asks what she knows about him. She replies that she hasn't. She says that means the little lady wants to see him. The Duke's trusted aides currently had two. Olivia handled his affairs in broad daylight. Brendan carried out his work in the shadows, and the two were husband and wife. Olivia asks his lordship to give her husband a couple of days' leave when he returns, as she has not seen him for so long. At this point, the gentleman reflected that Brendan hadn't provided any suspicious information either, and he felt he trusted him. The gentleman suggested Olivia move on to the next question. At this time, The servants gathered at the Lanches estate to greet the young lady. Upon seeing them, the girl was confused as to who all these people were and realized she had come home. The man approaches the lady and apologizes for not introducing himself immediately. He informs her that he is the new palace and estate of Lanches Herald. The butler reports that the estate has undergone renovations and therefore suggests that you admire it at your leisure. Hearing this, the protagonist wondered what this meant and what servants the Duke had hired. She asked where her brother Endymion was. The butler replies that he's in his chambers. He then says he thinks my lady should rest after her journey, as she's still recovering. She asks if her aunt and uncle are home too. He replies that they are. The main character calls them. Suddenly, the uncle opens the door and tells the girl that she's finally back. He says he thought he'd go crazy because she'd been gone for so long. Joseph says that this servant also fell on their heads, and they didn't want to let them in, but they said they came on the Duke's orders. He says that, of course, he's only a guardian, and asks if the Duke isn't overstepping his authority. The girl says she asked him and is grateful he agreed. She says the estate is now in perfect order, and she likes it. Lumina explains that she asked the butler to call them because she needs to tell them something. She asks her aunt and uncle to please leave their house immediately. Hearing this, her aunt asks her what she's thinking and asks why she's so stupid. She screams, claiming that the Duke's patronage has completely gone to her head and declares that she's not even a duchess yet. Teresa says that if she loses her inheritance, that's fine, because it will go to Endymion. At this point, the protagonist thinks that Auntie has decided to stop pretending to be a good person. And judging by this, Uncle doesn't even think to object. The main character thought that they never had and never would have agreement. Lumina asks her aunt if she's worried she won't inherit. She agrees and suggests she understand. The lady says she's very pleased that her aunt cares about her and tells her she doesn't need their disservice. The lady announces that Endymion will be entering the academy, and they become friends. But of course, they don't know about it. The uncle asks the girl how she will live alone on the estate. Lumina replies that she is getting married, and her fiancé is Karen von Hart, a young duke. Hearing this, my aunt and uncle were surprised, as they hadn't even expected such a turn of events. Then they asked why all of a sudden. The young lady replies that the Duke will teach her how to manage the family's affairs. She then says that she has won the young Duke from another suitor. Then she takes the bell and asks if they understand everything. The guards entered the room and asked if their mistress had called them. She replied that her aunt and uncle wished to return home as soon as possible, and therefore asked for their assistance. The aunt, screaming, asks the girl if she thinks she can live without them. The little girl says that not only will she be able to, but she will live happily ever after. And then she asserts that her aunt will see it for herself. The next day, the main character saw Endymion. She asked how he was. The boy replies that he was told he must pass an exam. At this point, the protagonist realizes he's gotten straight to the point. She asks if he's talking about the academy. The main character thought that maybe this was a second chance. Her brother said he had a very busy schedule. Lumina explains that she was simply afraid that his relatives might start bothering him. And then she thought about how the Duke had helped resolve the issue quickly. Endymion asks the girl if her legs are feeling better. She replies that she's already running. The boy says he's glad to hear it. Hearing this, the main character thought he was worried about her. The brother saw a guy with bright red hair and asked who it was. The young lady replies that it's Ash and that the Duke assigned him to her. Endymion says he's pleased to meet her. She says he'll join him tomorrow. Her brother says he doesn't mind. He tells her to prepare well for the test. Lumina says this will be their first outing together, and she's looking forward to it. The girl tells her brother not to worry, and if he doesn't know the answer, he should just skip the question and come back to it later. Milady says her brother might be hungry and offers him some candy. He says he feels like she's even more worried than he is. At this time, the main character thought that she knew that her brother would cope, but she couldn't just not worry. Endymion tells sister they'll see each other again. She says she completely forgot to tell her she's getting married because of the exam. Hearing this, the boy was surprised, and the lady saw his candy fall and then bent down to pick it up. He asks what kind of marriage this is. The girl says she'll tell him everything after the exam. Lumina wishes her good luck on the exam. Then she says she'll be looking forward to it with good results. The main character turns to Mr. Ash and says that the exam will last quite a long time, and then asks if maybe they should take a walk around the city for now. And at that moment, the girl thought this was her chance to get to know the future swordmaster better. She was also very interested in Munez's family. The protagonist recalls that in her first life, rumors circulated in society that the Monas family had fallen, and she believes they betrayed Duke von Hart. The girl recalls a conversation between two ladies she overheard, They were talking about the Duke and wondering why he was so concerned about these traitors. The young lady thought that betrayal in close circles could not help but be upsetting. The little girl ponders the fact that Great Traitor is a nickname that stuck with Olivia after she betrayed Lucius. But she realizes something strange is going on. Ash Munez is the son of a traitor. He received no punishment, despite constant criticism. Ash became a member of the Dark Moon Knights of the Fond Heart Duchy. At the time, the main character decided it wasn't her business, so she didn't dig too deep, but she still finds it rather suspicious. And she's the only one who thinks something's not quite right. Lumina suggests to her guard that they go downtown. Hearing this, he thinks she's just an ordinary girl and doesn't understand what she's suggesting. Then he remembers her request that he follow this girl and report back. The Duke asked him to try not to answer difficult questions, and he understands that if he has to speak, he should just say, "It's all right, no." Ash thought he wouldn't have to answer questions. The girl turns to him and asks if he thinks people are looking at them. He replies that everything is fine. At this point, the girl realized she'd imagined everyone was looking at her because of the newspaper. Then she approached the newspaper vendor and asked if she could have a copy. Lumina read that Duke von Hart had announced his wedding and had already performed the ceremony. The protagonist realizes her story is on the front page. She believes the photo must have been secretly taken in front of the estate. The main character thought that since her photo was in the newspaper, most people in the capital already knew her, and she thought about finding those scoundrels. Meanwhile, a man with a camera watches them from afar, thinking that all the newspapers are now writing about the girl who became a princess overnight, and so he believes they'll sell his photo for a high price. When the photographer was about to take a photo, he thought his hand had shaken and he needed to take another one, but suddenly he felt a blow and fell to the floor. Then screaming, he asks Kelton if the lady is near the luncheon. The security guard tells the man that not only is he taking photos without permission, but he's also being rude. The main character picks up the camera and says it's simply disgusting. Kelton is a derogatory nickname for those of humble origins, including those of common descent. It's a terribly offensive word that should never be spoken to someone's face. The stranger says he hasn't been caught yet and is just a passerby. The protagonist explains that her knight looks so much like him that he noticed him right away, and so she suggests he confess. The girl asks if she took this photo. Then she picks up the camera and pretends to throw it. The photographer sees this and says it's his. Then she asks her to give him the camera back because he's sorry, and she asks if they know how much it costs. At this point, the main character thought that her face revealed Jack, the infamous paparazzo. He might seem like a rookie now, but in just a couple of years, he'll become the most insidious photographer. Jack will sell photos with false information, and sometimes this will even lead to death. Lumina says she needs to say something, and then tells him he's a parasite, living off other people's lives. And she thinks his life is in the gutter because he's a worthless rag who sells other people's faces without a twinge of conscience. Hearing this, the man asks her to stop, and at that moment, the main character thought about how he doesn't like being scolded by others. And yet, he hurls insults at her. The girl thought that just because she took the camera, it didn't mean anything would change. She thought he'd just buy a new camera and take it back. The young lady believes she won't let Ash off the hook so easily. She says that if he wants the camera back, he should go get it. Lumina says, "Firstly, you can't insult people based on their appearance." And then she makes him repeat it several times. The young lady says that's correct, since Mr. Ash will decide for himself whether to forgive him or not. Then she says that if he wants, the photographer will be beaten. However, the boy says that everything is fine. The girl was surprised to hear this, then asked how he could be okay with it, since he had just insulted her. Ash insisted it was nothing. At this time, the main character became interested in how often he hears this and wonders if he is really that remarkable. Lumina says that if that's the case, he says, then she'll take action and punish him properly. Then she kicks the man between the legs and calls him a scoundrel. After some time, the main character says that she is so proud of herself because she caught the paparazzi and bought Enmian a gift, and claims that she would have been in trouble if the day hadn't been so eventful. The girl gives Mr. Ash a box and offers him to take it, since she bought it for him. The young lady reports that she noticed he was interested in desserts and decided to buy some because she thought he wanted something sweet. At this time, the guy thought that it turned out that she was busy choosing a gift for her brother, and he did not understand how she found time for him. The girl asks him if he likes it. Он отвечает. He replies that he does. The main character thinks this is great and then explains that the young duke also wears candy, and therefore thinks that their tastes are similar. The young lady thought that he didn't really like it because she looked at his appearance. Lumina says she thinks the exam is already over, and when she sees her brother, she asks him if he did well on the exam. She also asks if the questions were easy. Endymion asks his sister about marriage, and then she thinks he's getting straight to the point again, suggesting they get into the carriage first. The protagonist reveals that her husband is Prince von Hart. The boy asks if they're really together. She replies, no, explaining that she was simply visiting the estate. The young gentleman asks if he has confessed his feelings to her. Then he asks if she will give him a piece of her heart. The girl replies that he hasn't confessed anything to her. At this point, the young lady thought her brother thought she was passionately in love with her fiancé. He then asked why they were getting married. Endymion says he feels as if she's been deceived. He then points out that, according to Article 11 of the marriage law, a minor can have their marriage dissolved if the guardian's consent wasn't obtained, or if the marriage was forced. Lumina insists she wanted it herself, and then she thinks she can see he doesn't believe her, and she thinks there's nothing she can do, since she'll have to take matters into her own hands. The main character says that she didn't want to talk about it, but she fell in love with Karen at first sight. Hearing this, the boys simultaneously made surprised faces. The girl looked at them, wondering why Ash was surprised. Lumina says Karen is simply incredible. His hair is jet black. His eyes are golden, like the sun. The colors in his clothes evoke both day and night. The girl says he has sharp features, as if he were a lone wolf. Endymion thought for a moment and then said, well, if the young lady likes him so much, then he supposes there's nothing he can do about it. Hearing this, the main character thought that the lone wolf strategy was working. A brother turns to his sister and says that men can't tell if they love a woman if they've only seen her a couple of times. He says he doesn't understand what he's trying to say. Endymion explains that he's heard that love and marriage are two different things, and so he asks her to let him know if the young Duke of Hart turns out to have any character issues, even despite his appearance. The main character heard this and did not understand how such a child could know about love. The boy turns to the guard and says he must know the young Duke well, as he is close to the ducal family. He asks if he can tell them what kind of person he is. Ash replies that he doesn't stand out in any way. His brother says that just because he doesn't stand out doesn't mean he's any good. At this point, the main character was thinking that things weren't going to work out this way, and decided they needed to change the subject. Then she turned to her brother and said that, while he was taking his exam, she'd bought him some gifts. Hearing this, the boy asks in surprise what gifts she bought him. Lumina says she told the maids to wrap them up, and then suggests they go home and unwrap each one. These words intrigued the boy, and the girl thought about it. She succeeded because, as expected, children will be children. When they arrived home, the young gentleman immediately began unwrapping his gifts. When he saw a teddy bear, he thought it was a joke. Then he asked his sister what it was. The girl replies that she bought it at a toy store and chose it because she thought he would be lonely at first, since he wouldn't know anyone in the dorm. Endymion looked at the box and thought, that's it. Lady June says that if not during the day, then at night, he will definitely feel lonely. And she suggests that in such moments, he remember that she loves him. The main character tells him to press on her chest and hug it tighter while he sleeps. The boy takes the toy in his hands and thinks about how much she loves him. For some time, newspapers reported that this was a sensation because the nobles had a new secret hobby, and everyone who had held secret meetings to study black magic was arrested. The main character, after reading the newspaper, says it seems like every nobleman was questioned about this case, and the young gentleman says that even their family relatives are involved. Lumina says that they were apparently trying to open a new business using black magic. The girl thought that when this scandal had just broken out in her past life, she had always wondered why Joseph was so happy. It turned out that the whole thing was run by the Vales family, and when Teresa was too busy dealing with the case, he personally took control of the Lanchas family. The main character thought that now she was the only one who was enjoying what was happening. Endymion asks his sister if she had a hand in this. Hearing this, she smiles and replies that she had nothing to do with it. The girl says she has no idea what's going on there, and she doesn't even have time to read the newspapers. And then she realizes she's only thrown out a small bait. The young lady recalls that when she spoke to Jack, she then reported that she had heard that Carmela, the opera singer, had someone with whom she regularly met face to face. Hearing this, the man, surprised, says that this can't be. But at that moment, the main character notices his interest, and for some time, newspapers began to report that the famous opera singer Carmela, a well-known commoner, was about to be embroiled in a scandal involving the nobility. As expected, Jack began following Carmela, and eventually, he probably discovered that her lover was studying black magic. Initially, a journalist with a heightened sense of justice took on this case. However, the matter ended badly, as even high-ranking nobles were involved, and it all led to him being sued, creating a whole host of problems. Lumina thought about how this time Jack would be the one being sued, and she thought that was the only way to get revenge. At this time, Endymion looked at the girl and thought that he had no idea what his sister was thinking. The boy reflects on the fact that he was shocked by the sudden news of marriage, but since he is her half-brother, he cannot simply stop her. The young master believes that if his sister is ever hurt, he will personally stand by her side to protect her. But to do so, he understands he must gain the strength to stand up to the ducal family. Endymion thought that even if this only lasted as long as he was useful, he hoped he could be of use to his sister. Endymion easily passed the exam to enter the Nejuro Academy, and he quickly became her student. When sister came to see him off to the academy, she told him not to focus solely on his studies. She told him to try to make as many friends as possible who shared his interests. The main character believes this is a great opportunity to expand the boundaries of her world. After all, friends can sometimes even be the best support, and you can also have a great time with them. A boy turns to his sister and says he has something he needs to tell her. Upon hearing this, the girl asks if he was even listening. Endymion asks if she has ever been to the scene of the crime. At this point, the main character thought about the car accident that killed her, her father, and her stepmother. The boy injured his leg, but this was the first time he mentioned the accident since the funeral. Lumina asks what happened that day. Anything unusual? He tells her to just forget it, because he's curious. Then he turns around and says he's leaving. Hearing this, the main character thought he'd just end the conversation on that note, and she thought there was no point in dredging up bad memories. The sister tells her brother that she will write him letters, and then tells him not to forget to write back if anything happens. Endymion leaves without even turning around, saying he understands everything. Then he tells her he'll miss her too. 2 weeks later, Lumina turns to the Duke and calls him father, and tells him that she is already home. The girl asks how he is doing, and also asks if anything unusual happened. The heroine saw the surprised looks of both the Duke and the servants. She asked if it had been too rude of her, and wondered if she should perhaps call him Duke. The gentleman assures her that everything is fine. Then he explains that since she is officially married to Karen, she can call him her father. Hearing this, the girl thought that it seemed to her that his lordship was in a good mood. Von Hart says she's probably tired from the journey and suggests she go to her room and rest. Then he tells her that if she needs anything, she should tell the maid. Hearing this, the Lumina thanked him. Suddenly, the girl felt someone lift her into his arms. The master said that since it would obviously be difficult for her to find her way, he would carry her there. The young lady claims she knows where she's supposed to go. He says he does, and then reveals that she now lives somewhere else. Hearing these words, the girl was surprised and became curious as to why this was a different place. The gentleman shows the lady the room and informs her that it has been slightly renovated for the little duchess. He suggests she look to the left, as this room is the living room. Olivia says she can enjoy the garden views from the balcony while sipping tea. She then shows off the dressing room. Lumina looked at all this luxury and said she'd rather stay somewhere else. And then she thought about how this wasn't a room, but an entire house. The Duke asks in surprise if she's too young for him. The girl replies that she's asking for forgiveness. The gentleman turns to Olivia and tells her to call the contractors. He then informs her that they knocked down the walls today and converted the entire floor into a room. The protagonist hears this and doesn't understand what he's talking about. The maid explains that on this floor, there's a room where the former Duke kept his paintings. The young lady thought it was right that Olivia objected to him. However, the maid said she didn't think there would be any problems. Hearing this, the girl thought even Olivia had lost her mind. Lumina turns to the Duke and says, "That's not what she meant," and then explains that she meant it was too luxurious for someone like her. The Duke asks what someone like her means. She replies, "Someone who barely restrains her desire for luxury." At this point, the protagonist thought that if she got used to such places, she might repeat the life of greed she led in her past, and she realizes that period of her life was chaos, and she doesn't want to return to it. The girl says she'd prefer something smaller. Then she explains that it could be a place with little light, or something like an attic, where everything is covered in dust and bugs are lurking. Lumina, screaming, claims it's because she's more used to places like this. Seeing their surprised faces, The protagonist wondered if she'd gone too far, and it seemed to her that the atmosphere around her had become even more tense. The Duke insists that she lives here with Karen Yi, and given the intense public scrutiny, they must share a room. He says that, as the daughter-in-law of the Hart Duchy, staying in this squalid, attic-like place will make her look down on. Von Hart therefore suggests the girl simply use this room. Hearing this, the protagonist thinks that since the Duke insists so much, she has no choice. So she decides to stay, but thinks it's only because she has to. Olivia turns to the lady and says she has something to tell her, then pours her some tea. Hearing this, the main character becomes curious about what she wants to talk about. The maid reveals that she is actually Olivia Munez, the Duke's assistant. She begs her mistress's sincere forgiveness for concealing her identity and gaining her trust. Hearing this, the main character thought that she too was asking for her forgiveness, since she already knew her true identity, and also that she would soon betray the Duke. The girl understands that there is nothing suspicious about this maid, but she still wonders how carefully she will plan the betrayal. The protagonist realizes that even if she tries to pry information out of Ash, he won't tell her much, and she considers trying to convince Olivia of this. The maid says that she knows that the mistress probably feels betrayed, and also disappointed that she did not make her identity public from the beginning. Lumina assures Olivia that everything is fine, and then says that it doesn't matter who she is, the Duke's maid or assistant, since to her she is still the same Olivia. The girl says that she likes her the way she is, and then smiles. A woman with bright red hair turns to the lady and asks her to accept this as an apology. The girl, surprised, asks what it is. When the young lady looked, she saw it was an opera ticket. She was delighted with the gift as she'd never been to this place before. She was also curious to try it. That evening, they went to the opera, and when the carriage stopped, the Duke stepped out to offer his hand to young Summer. At this time, the aristocrats were watching them and were wondering who the Duke was accompanying. Lumina looked at the opera house and, smiling, said that she was so glad that she was going there with her father. At that moment, the girl's heart fluttered. After all, the tickets Olivia had given her that day turned out to be opera tickets, and as soon as Olivia handed them to her, she immediately realized it was part of a carefully orchestrated war for public opinion. After the sudden announcement of her marriage to Karen, she became a duchess overnight. As a result, she was sure to be met with a torrent of questioning glances. The Duke of Hart likely intends to lay the groundwork for her as a young duchess. He intends to demonstrate the good relationship they have. The girl realizes that Olivia Munez is more than just a capable assistant, and the title of the play is He's a Monster. But that's okay. And in it, the main character is a monster, and his beloved is an ordinary person. In fact, the main drama lies in their conflict. The protagonist suggested to his beloved that she not look at him because he was a monster, and in fact, he looked terrible and felt hungry when he saw her like that. Watching this performance, the girl thought that they simply portrayed the Legionnaires as monsters. The Duke says he doesn't think the actress is particularly popular. The girl asks if he really thinks so. Olivia explains that it's probably because she barely had time to get into character. The maid explains that Carmela was originally supposed to be the lead actress, but she was forced to leave the production due to rumors of infidelity and black magic. The assistant informs that since the play is based on the Duke's love story, many people may not like it. Lumina, surprised, asks what kind of love story this is. The Duke's. And at that moment, she thought that this was her chance to get to know the Duke and Duchess. The gentleman replies that this is pure imagination and nothing more. He believes that these are probably just exaggerated rumors picked up somewhere. The young lady asks if this is a coincidence. Then she says she wants to hear more about her father's love story. Duke von Hart removed his glasses and looked at the girl. He said his bright, classy eyes looked the same even when he wasn't using his powers. And, as a rule, this makes not only ordinary people but even other Legionnaires avoid him. The man says that Iris was the only one who accepted him for who he was. She always supported him, and he felt her love. Lumina says she was an incredibly kind person. He replies that there's no one else like her in the world. At this time, the main character looked at the Duke's expression and thought that now she even felt somehow awkward asking about his love story. While watching the performance, the girl saw her assistant suddenly dash off. She thought she should follow her, and then she'd figure something out. The Duke saw the girl rise from her chair and ask what was bothering her. He asked if she really didn't like the game. The young lady objects and explains that it's not that. The gentleman asks if perhaps it's because she too is afraid of his eyes. The main character says that's not the case at all. And then she thinks that this isn't the first time she's seen them. Lumina explained that she needed to go to the bathroom. When she left, the gentleman realized he had no idea what she was trying to do. Brendan turns to the gentleman and apologizes for being late. He then says that the report on Lumina de Lanches is out, and that no matter how much he's studied it, he couldn't find anything. Olivia says she's thought about it a lot and believes the young lady is harmless. Ash insists she's ordinary, then says that, to be more precise, he'll find her strange. At this point, the main character ran out into the hallway and realized that the assistant couldn't have gone far. She believed she must be somewhere nearby. Olivia stood by the sink, washing her face. Then she asked why the young lady had left. After all, the performance wasn't over yet. At this time, the girl thought that she did not understand why she had such a strange feeling. Lumina tells the woman she's not Olivia. Then she asks who she is. The assistant apologizes and then asks what she means. She also asks if she's not Olivia. Then who is she? The girl says she'd really like to know too, and she insists she's certain she's not Olivia, because she knows Olivia isn't a Legionnaire. The woman, surprised, asked how she'd figured that out. The lady replied that it was by accident. The woman with red hair says that Ash told her she was weird, and now she thinks he was right. Suddenly, the girl saw Brendan instead of Olivia, and he asks if this face is more familiar to her. Lumina was surprised to see the Duke's assistant. He said it seemed more difficult not to tell her. The main character asks where the real Olivia is. He replies that she's probably busy with the backlog of work at the estate. She's a hard-working woman who's only ever seen the word procrastination in a dictionary. The girl says she never thought he'd turn out to be a liar, too. Then she asks if he even believes it. The man explains that he merely borrowed his wife's appearance with her permission. And he says that calling him a liar for that would be quite cruel. Hearing this, the main character was surprised because she does not understand whether it is possible that Olivia's husband and Ash's father was Sir Brendan. The assistant reports that he is a true genius of transformation, not limited to one gender. Suddenly, Brendan transformed into the young Mr. Karen and told the girl to look. She was surprised when she saw it. Then he changed forms several more times. The assistant transformed into an old man. This appearance intrigued the girl. She asked if this old man was his grandfather. Brendan explains that he simply caught a glimpse of his face somewhere. Hearing this, the protagonist thinks he has no idea of the doctor's identity. Suddenly, the young lady noticed something was wrong with his hand. Then she told the sir that his hand was melting. He said he was caught at the very end. The gentleman explains that he can only persevere when his mind is full of strength. And he explains that over time, even his face begins to melt and ooze. Lumina says she'll call her father and turns to leave. Seeing this, the master tells her to stay put and not go anywhere. Then he tells her that if the captain finds out, he's done for. The girl asks why he would kill him for such a trifle, and asks if he's so heartless. Brendan explains that's not what he meant, and then says he shouldn't know about it. The assistant explains there's nothing special to show, and suggests she look at his hand. He says it's proof he's been tainted by black magic. He says it's limited, and if the captain finds out, he's practically dead. The protagonist asks how he learned the details of the restriction. Brendan replies that it's because the doctor who cast the black magic on him told him so himself, and when he woke up, there was only darkness around him. The assistant explains that on that day, he was carrying out his captain's orders as usual. By the time he realized someone in a deep black hood was approaching him, it was already too late, and he lost consciousness. Brendan awoke to the familiar smell of medicine and the lingering scent of old red liquid. He reported that there was a man there who was desperately tracking the captain. The doctor turned to him and asked if his escaped experimental subject had woken up. Then he asked if his name was Brendan now. The man reports that the doctor continued to speak as if he knew him well. Then he revealed that he had poisoned him. Since the test results were positive, he should soon begin to feel the effects. The doctor says that if he wants the antidote, he should bring him data on the ancient magic that Duke Hart was researching. Then he says he'll have it all for a week, and if he doesn't get the data, he'll die. The assistant reports that when he came to, the doctor had already disappeared. Upon hearing this, the girl, surprised, asks why he means this. He replies that he doesn't know. Lumina asks if he's told Olivia about this. The gentleman replies that he hasn't had the chance yet. At this point, the protagonist thought that she was sure Olivia would eventually figure this all out, and even if she didn't immediately, she believed she was perceptive enough to eventually notice something strange was going on. The protagonist understands it's only a matter of time, and she reflects on the fact that the reason she betrayed the Duke's house was for her husband's sake, or more precisely, for his salvation. The girl believes she's willing to do this even at the cost of her life. Because Olivia possesses a unique ability invaluable for gathering information, she's a gifted individual worthy of Ducart's trust, and she values her family immensely. Lumina thinks that's why she likes Olivia, and she thought about how she doesn't want to let her die. The main character says that she feels like black magic is being used as a limitation, and therefore believes that they only need to get the antidote within a certain time, and asks if she is saying it correctly. The young lady says that if that's all there is to it, she has a solution. Hearing this, the gentleman is surprised and then asks what it is. The girl says that it is useless to use his abilities as a legionnaire, and then asks, what if he makes a mistake and goes down the path of black magic? The little girl asks Sir Brendan if he has a little money to start with. He replies that he does, and she says that's lucky for him. The young lady suggests that he give her the money. Olivia informs the gentleman that Lumina has left with Brendan. She explains that he, now disguised as an ordinary servant, mentioned that upon returning to the mansion yesterday, Lady Lumina was delighted with the performance. The assistant reports that the girl said she would secretly buy him a gift. She believes it will be a return gift. Olivia says she didn't bring anyone with her and asks what they should do now. He says it's fine because she's with Brendan. The Duke was intrigued by the word gift, and he wondered what she would bring this time. However, he realized that the girl was very good at surprising. Meanwhile, Brendan says he can't believe they've come to the slums. He wonders if there really will be someone here who can eliminate the doctor's poison. He also reflects on the fact that he didn't even know much about this doctor. The man thought he himself didn't understand what he'd expected from this child. Then he thought he should play along and quickly get back. The assistant asks the lady where exactly they're heading. She replies, to Erica's house. Then she explains, Erica, the owner of the house, if you lay a finger on me, I'll fall apart. Lumina informs him that this is the only place where there is a benefactress who can cure him of the poison. At this point, the main character thought that if she were asked to describe Eric's character, she would say he was a self-made man in his past life. He was also described as a genius in the field of herbalism. Erica gained recognition in scientific circles after a series of renowned works, which quickly made him rich and famous. He attracted considerable attention, but after about 6 years, those who suspected foul play began a secret investigation. It turned out that the genius who was once hailed as the Pearl of the Empire was a fraudster who stole all the work from his stepdaughter. Despite the Empire's belated attempts to save Erica, she perished after being subjected to long-term cruelty at the hands of this scumbag. In her previous life, she never saw the light of day, and so she was nicknamed the Hapless Genius. The main character reflects that if the doctor who poisoned Brendan is a genius, then only an equally brilliant person can outsmart him. Suddenly, the girl heard cries of disbelief about how this chick was talentless and had too much potential, and he couldn't properly utilize it. And another man said that this wasn't what he asked for. The assistant turns to the lady and says that he thinks it would be better if they come another time. However, the girl does not listen to him, but opens the door and says, "It's evening in the hut." The man, screaming, asks who she is. Lumina realized it was Erica's stepfather, a swindler and a scoundrel. Lumina explained that she is a customer who heard that he sells herbs here. The man, screaming, says he has no idea where she heard such nonsense and tells her to get lost. However, the girl insists she's sure she's in the right place. The main character announces that she's come to pick up Erica. Then she turns to the lady and suggests they leave. Then she turns to the sir and offers to take care of the rest. When the girl took Erica, Brendan had to calm her stepfather down, and he eventually took care of everything. The main character says that people should be used wisely and at the right time. The little girl informs that the first thing that needs to be done is to show gratitude to your benefactor. The young lady turns to the girl and asks if she's shocked. She then tells her that her name is Lumina. Upon hearing this, the girl considers that she doesn't have a last name and that her name is simply Lumina. Then she considers that anyone could tell by just looking at her that she's of noble blood. Erica asks why they were looking for her. The girl explains that they say Lady Erica can create a magnificent cure, literally out of nothing, and asks if it's true. Brendan was surprised to hear this, as he'd never heard anything like it. He believed that even he, someone who operates in the criminal underworld, knew nothing about it. The man became curious about how a little girl who spent her entire life behind closed doors had such information. Lumina informs her that she has come to ask her for a favor, which she will only have 3 days to complete. Hearing this, Erica says she's not what they need and then apologizes. However, the main character insists that she hear her out completely. She says that if she accepts her order, she'll help her get back on her feet. The young lady says she's often thought about how she doesn't want to live such a miserable life and asks, "Isn't that so?" And then she thinks about how she lives in the slums, penniless, pretending to be clueless and just hiding under her mother's skirt. While her stepfather takes credit for everything, her invention from the article, the protagonist realizes she's clearly fed up with it all and wants to escape. Lumina asks Lady Erica if she knows what it is. Then he shows her a bottle containing a blue liquid. She asks if it's slime. Hearing this, the main character thought that she instantly recognized it, just as she had assumed. The little girl thought that since the slums had a low level of security, it was easier to encounter monsters there than in other places. The current perception of monsters is that they're simply bad creatures that Legionnaires fight. But once serious research into monsters begins, everything will change dramatically, thanks to Erica and her dissertation. The protagonist asks Brendan if he's ever seen slime that can't take the required shape and keeps spreading. He asks if by slime she means him, and the girl then says that, roughly speaking, he wants to believe that Lady Erica will be able to fix this slime. Lumina says she'll provide her with everything she needs for the next 3 days. Then she tells her that if she succeeds, she'll guarantee her a bright future. Erica says he doesn't know if she can handle it. The protagonist insists she can because she believes in her. Brendan heard this and couldn't understand how she could make such confident statements without a shadow of a doubt, and he thought that after that, even he believed her. Lumina says this proposal is her first and last chance to finally see the light of day. She urges the girl to take responsibility for her own future and make the right choice. The main character says all that's left to do now is wait for good news. The assistant says that if this girl doesn't succeed, he'll have wasted his money. The little girl asks why he's so pessimistic. He replies that it's because she keeps giving him false hope, and he's developing unfulfilled expectations. Brendan says he just threw money away by picking up a random person from the slums. Lumina asks the gentleman if he's ever gambled. Then she explains that it's the same as betting. Because he doesn't know what cards the other players have, he instead guesses the results by reading others' expectations. The young lady says that the higher the stake in a situation others consider impossible, the greater the chance of winning big. She says it's the same thing, and they can raise the stakes because they have nothing to lose. The main character reveals that she is the most feared player at the card table. Hearing this, the man thought she was just a child who couldn't even pronounce the word gambler, and he couldn't understand why she could be so confident. Brendan asks the lady where the gift is. Then he reminds her that she slipped away under the pretext of Togo going to get a gift for the captain. He says he told Liv everything, and therefore thinks the captain already knows. Hearing this, the main character thought that Liv was Olivia's nickname. This meant he was telling her everything. The girl believed he was hinting that he was essentially playing the role of a double agent, and realized that this was quite bold of him. The young lady considers that perhaps she shouldn't trust him with any secrets. He asks what she plans to do. Then he says it's late and he thinks finding a suitable gift will be difficult. Lumina agrees with him and thinks that she will have to find a way out. The Duke asks what brings her here at such a late hour. The girl explains that she went into town today without his knowledge. The Count thought he already knew, and he remembered Olivia's request that he not speak of it, since they were keeping Brendan's spy a secret. The main character says she's so grateful they accepted her as their daughter-in-law, so she thought it would be nice to bring them a gift. The young lady says that she doesn't think there is a gift that would suit him perfectly, and that's why, but suddenly, he interrupts her and says that's why she didn't buy anything. The little girl says that she couldn't take a photo of him, so she drew a picture and shows it. Seeing this, the Duke doesn't understand what it is, and then asks if it's a demon. Hearing this, the main character thought about what she expected at all, and believes that it is impossible to get an appropriate answer from him for the situation. The little girl says he's the father, and then explains that she drew him. And at that moment, she thinks it sounds crazy, but she realizes she had no choice but to draw him because time was running out. The young lady considered that, given the circumstances, she would probably have to play her trump card. Then she said she felt her skills weren't sufficient to show respect and love to her father. The little girl says that if he doesn't like the drawing, then she will take it away. The gentleman takes the drawing and asks who said he doesn't like it. Then he says it touches his heart and suggests leaving it there. Hearing this, the main character was surprised and she does not understand how he can like him if he previously called her a demon. The gentleman turns to the girl and says that she mentioned that this was her thank you gift for him and asks if this is true. The Duke asks if she can draw him more of these when she has free time. Lumina was surprised to hear this and wondered what he was going to do with these pathetic drawings. But she thought the request was quite simple. The young lady says that if he wants, she can make them for him any time. At this point, Brendan enters Olivia's room and says he came to talk about something. He asks if she's busy. The red-haired woman asks him what he's doing here so late. Then she says she needs to take care of a young lady. He says that's precisely why he came. Lumina asks if it's true that her family will be coming from their hometown. The maid replies that it is, and she hasn't seen them in so long that she's really looking forward to seeing them. The maid claims it's all thanks to the young lady. The protagonist asks if she can go and meet them with her. Then she says she always cares for her, and so she'd like to see her loved ones at least once. And she can't wait for that meeting. Brendan says he thinks this will require him to leave for a while. Then he suggests Olivia not to worry, as she could easily transform into a family member. Hearing this, the woman says she never told her that when she was serving her. Olivia, crying out, asks why she offered this only to him. Then she announces that she wants to serve the young lady again. The man turns to the woman, calling her dear, and suggests she calm down. Brandon says maybe she's just bored of sitting indoors all day on this rainy day. Then he asks if she knows that at such a young age, children usually can't sit still. Olivia says she thinks it's better to go outside, even on a day like this, because the estate is still boring. The mate asks what's wrong with the captain. She replies that everything is as usual, and he's closed all the curtains because of the sudden rain. He's also drinking Calvados alone. The woman says she's worried about whether everything will be okay with the young master on such a day. The man says he thinks the rain will stop soon, so they assume everything should be fine. Lumina exits the train. A guard offers her a hand to help. She thanks him and says she hasn't been to the station in a while. Suddenly, Ash heard someone calling him, and when he turned around, he saw the maid, but he realized it was his father's voice. The maid says she's his father. Hearing this, Ash wonders what it means that he's reincarnated as a maid this time. He asks if they're planning to meet his family. Brendan explains that the family story had to be concocted in a hurry, so he simply hired actors. He then tells the boy to pretend he doesn't know he's his father. The maid turns to the young lady and says she will now be her guide. She then informs her that her sister is waiting opposite the station. She replies that she understands. Lumina asks how she managed to convince her real family. She replies that she has perfected her acting skills. Hannah says that this is her younger sister Erica, and then says that she misses her very much. The girl says she was worried about her sister, who works in such a large mansion, so she prepared some herbal remedies in her hometown. The main character tells Hannah she's so lucky to have a caring sister. Then she asks Ash if he could bring them an egg tart from Fashion Bakery while they chat. The guy was surprised when he heard this, but the girl said that egg tart takes over an hour to cook, and if it's done right, when you slowly insert sharp knives into it, it makes a wonderful crispy sound. And when you cut it in half, there's a moist, airy custard inside. Lumina says that since they arrived, her mouth is watering just thinking about that cake. Then she says that's the only one she can ask to buy. At this time, the young guard thought that since his father was here, he thought that if he left for a short time, there would be no problems. The main character thought that now that Ash was gone, they could get down to business. Erica says she guessed she was a lady of noble blood. She never imagined she was Ducart's daughter-in-law, and she says she wished she'd known she'd met her. But the main character interrupts her and says that if she had, she probably would have bowed to her from the very first meeting. And then she says that's exactly why she didn't say anything. Lumina asks how the medicine is progressing and if it's working. The girl replies that when she tested it on mucus, the results were perfect. The lady says that if the mucus treatment worked, then they can try it on people. She asks if she could tell her more about the medicine. Erica says the substance in the flask she gave her earlier has the same composition as the slime. She believes that thanks to the lady, she was able to narrow down her search, which is why everything went more smoothly. The girl says that when the mucus absorbs the root of a plant called Photania, it exhibits abnormal reactions. The moisture in its body quickly evaporates, causing it to lose its shape and begin to melt. Hearing this, the protagonist thought it meant Brendan was in the same state as the slime-consuming Photania, and that day, she immediately noticed that he was like melting slime, which surprised her greatly. Lumina recalls that around this time in her past life, the melting slime phenomenon spread across the continent. Fortune-tellers associated this phenomenon with the coming end of humanity. This presented a huge problem for the Empire. It was Erica who then academically proved the phenomenon of melting mucus, thereby making a name for herself in the scientific community. However, this thesis was published as her stepfather's achievement. The protagonist wondered if Brendan had perhaps researched poisons that people could ingest in the past, but had been unable to discover the poison and, consequently, the antidote. Lumina turns to the girl and says she must have worked all night given the tight deadlines, then declares it's excellent work. Erica thanks the lady for her generous support and says it was the happiest time of her life. The young lady says that if this is true, then she will be happy all her life. Hearing this, the girl is surprised and then asks if she means it. The protagonist again interrupts her, telling her that they are now close, and so she will ensure that Togo continues to pursue the research she so loves. The mistress tells her to let her know if her stepfather tries to restrain her in any way. She then asserts that she will take care of him. Hearing this, the maid thinks the lady is becoming like the captain. She considers this a clear disadvantage of homeschooling. Erica says she thinks she'll never see her stepfather again. She explains that after he was taken away by the knights she summoned, she and her mother talked a lot, and she said she doesn't need a husband who beats her daughter. Hearing this, Lumina says it's good news and announces that she will take on the task of setting up the lab. However, she advises the girl to remember that even when she becomes incredibly famous in the near future, her orders should be a priority. Erica thanks the lady for believing in her still developing abilities. She then explains that she's forever grateful to her, and that's why she strives to be helpful. At this time, the main character thought that if she could lure someone as talented as Erica to her side from the very beginning, then in the future, she would be able to achieve everything she wanted. The young lady realizes that the future continues to change, and now Erica will not be known as an unlucky genius, and she will not die early. Lumina ponders how, with the alimony the Duke will give her in the divorce, she will be able to live comfortably for the rest of her life. However, she realizes she will never know what her future holds, especially because of her relatives. The girl thinks they might be keeping quiet for now, but she understands they'll definitely cause problems eventually. She considers that her decisions could create a butterfly effect, and she can't predict how things will turn out. The protagonist understands that it's not yet time to show her hand, one way or another. She must eventually have enough strength for revenge, and she understands that she can't do it without Brendan's help. The little girl turns to Brendan and asks him to do her a favor. He says the young lady can ask for anything. Lumina says she wants to create an acrostic using the word slave. She asks for the initial syllable. Hearing this, the maid pauses for thought and then reveals one letter. The girl says that's excellent and then says that if she takes this antidote, she will survive and become her subordinate. Brendan is surprised to hear this. He asks if she's asking to be her subordinate. The main character explains that she wants him to treat her the way he treats the Duke and asks if it is easy. The maid asks if she refuses and if she'll give her the antidote. The young lady objects, saying that, of course, the antidote is hers anyway. She explains that she doesn't resort to such pathetic manipulations and therefore has no desire to build their relationship in that manner. The main character explains that she simply wants a capable man by her side, someone who would become her subordinate and not betray her. The maid, surprised, asks if she's asking her to become a double agent. Lumina replies that she will, but it won't be much different from what she's doing now for the Duke. She also informs him that she will be forbidden from reporting her actions to her father, and if anything happens, he will become her hands and feet. The little girl tells her not to worry, as she's not telling her to hand over her father. She also explains that she has no intention of confronting him or leaking any confidential information. The main character, Padumala, explains that because she looks like a child, she couldn't act openly outside the home, but she believes that with the help of someone talented like Brendan, she could be more proactive. The maid says she'd like to ask something. She wonders where the nickname Calvados comes from, but suddenly, Brendan felt the time had come, and so had his face. The girl says it's even for the better, and then she asserts, to test the medicine's effectiveness, there's nothing better than taking it when the illness is getting worse. The little girl recalls that Erica mentioned earlier that when she experimented with the mucus, the medicine worked immediately after administration, and she hopes he'll recover quickly. The assistant says he still has a question for her. Lumina says Ash is returning and asks if he'd like to show his beloved son the state of her face. She tells him to take the antidote quickly. The maid asks what if it doesn't work. She claims there are 2 days left until the doctor's appointment. She understands they won't have time to find another antidote, so she believes today will be the day. Lumina says he'll either recover and join her, or he'll keep his family in the dark and die. Then she asks why he's hesitating if the worst-case scenario is inevitable. The main character reminds him that she's already told him that the less he has to lose, the more freely he can raise the stakes. She asserts that such an opportunity comes once in a lifetime. Therefore, she suggests he be more confident. The girl tells Ash he can keep the cakes. He apologizes and then explains he bought them because she wanted them. The young lady says there were so many desserts there, she's already full and simply can't eat anymore. Hearing this, the boy wondered if she'd changed her mind too quickly about what she'd been so delighted with. And then he looked at his father and realized that he probably wasn't feeling too well. He wondered what was wrong with the maid and asked about it. Lumina replies that Hannah is probably in deep thought right now, having just reunited with her sister after such a long time. And at that moment, she's thinking about how the medicine didn't work. She also thinks that maybe it's not right for Brendan. Hannah says the lady is right and explains that she was so overwhelmed with emotion that she simply couldn't hold back her tears. Hearing this, the girl thought it had worked. Then she asked the maid how she felt. She replied that she was fine, having already come to her senses. Ash was surprised to see this, and he didn't understand what it was. And he thought his dad was getting into character too much. Then he looked at the cookie and thought, I could actually eat this. The little girl thought about how only good people share food. Then she asked if they were going home yet. Ash asks the lady what that light is. She replies that it's the pendant, and when she saw it glow, she was surprised and thought that it couldn't be. The girl remembered the Duke's words that she would be able to find him immediately whenever he needed her. Suddenly, the main character finds herself in an alley. She sees the Karen and asks if he can hear her. She also wonders if he recognizes her. The little girl realizes he's not responding and asks how many fingers she's holding up. He looks at the lady and tells her to stay away from him. Lumina reports that she now sees he's fine, but she saw that his entire body was covered in wounds. And she thought about how he'd been in a fight and had just been beaten, despite being a Legionnaire. The main character claims that if he wanted, he could raze everything here to the ground, and asks why he's holding back. The young gentleman replies that if he doesn't do this, he will become like him. The little girl asks if he's talking about the Duke. He replies, yes. Then he explains that that day was no different from today. It was raining, and his mother lay in his arms, lost in eternal sleep. Lumina says there's no point in talking about it if it's hard for him. She also says she understands he doesn't want to remember that day. The guy says that as soon as it starts raining, that scene appears before his eyes, and that day keeps playing in his head, and he can't even move. The girl gives him an umbrella and says that everything is fine, and then suggests that they go back home. Karen says they look alike. Hearing this, the girl asks if he's talking about the man who helped him on the day of the massacre. He asks how she knows. The main character explains that she overheard it by accident, and at that moment, I thought about how he shouldn't mention Duke Hart. Lumina touches the boy's face and says she thinks he still has a fever. He takes her hand and asks what she's doing. The young lady says he feels a little warm, but she's not sure if it's because of the fever, as she thinks it might just be her hands that are warm. The little girl claims she will cure him, just like last time. Hearing this, he is surprised and asks if she means that time. Karen says she fainted immediately after the healing. However, the girl assures her that everything will be fine today, and so she suggests trusting her. The protagonist reflected that last time. It had happened because Togo had used her powers too often, completely unaware of her own limitations. And since then, she hadn't used her powers on anyone. The young lady realizes that she's also had plenty to eat, plenty of sleep, and a wonderful time in the Duke's house, and she believes it's time to repay her debt. At that moment, the girl realized it had all started again, and she felt sick, like she was being sucked into a black swamp, and her heart felt like it was being squeezed in a cold vice. The young gentleman looked at the girl and said that this was what needed to be proven, and then ordered her to let him go immediately. However, she objected, and he told her to stop, as it was hurting her to the point of tears. But the young lady objected again, thinking about what she had to endure. She believed that if she couldn't cure Karen, the contract would be annulled. She also wondered how he could act so naturally if he was in so much pain. Lumina wondered if it was him, since she too had learned to ignore pain, and she hoped that wasn't the case. The girl tells him not to let himself be, and after these words, she loses consciousness again. The maid asks the servant if the Duke is still in his room. The green-haired servant replies that since the girl is still new and doesn't know anything, she's not going to leave. Then she explains that he never comes out until the rain stops. The head maid suggests they stop chatting and get back to work, as she believes it's best not to get caught slacking off on days like these. Suddenly, a young gentleman enters the room, holding a baby girl in his arms. He screams and orders them to call a doctor immediately. Karen reflected on how he had come to the Duke's estate for the first time of his own free will, and he recalled swearing to himself that he would never again return to a place inhabited by the man he least wanted to call his father. The young master believes that when he realized that she had taken his wounds, the only place that came to his mind was the Duke's estate. The guy realizes that this place he hates most is the only one where she can get help, and he thinks it's pathetic and insulting. However, Karen is curious about this girl who uses strange magic, and he asks his father about it. The Duke replies that it's not magic, and she's a legionnaire, not a healer. Father suggests keeping her close, as she'll be useful to him. Hearing this, the boy thought about how they didn't know a single legionnaire who could heal. He wonders if healing abilities simply transfer wounds from the healed to the legionnaire. Then Lumina must have taken all the pain he was experiencing at that moment for herself. Karen thought that, knowing this and having experienced it firsthand, she still decided to marry him, and he couldn't understand what she saw in him that was so significant. Suddenly, the girl started to stir, asking why Endymion did that. Hearing this, the guy thought it was a male thing and was surprised. He also became curious about who Endymion was and what he did to her, as well as what their relationship was like. The boy wondered if this was the name of the one she had loved before. He knew Lumina was very young, but among nobles, talk of marriage began at a much earlier age. Karen reflects on how naive she seems, and perhaps agreed because she was incapable of saying no. She also believes that the more time they spent together, the more likely she was developing an irresponsible love. However, the young master does not understand why he is angry and why he feels something like this. When the girl came to, she said she was cold and asked if it was night. The guy told her not to get up, but to lie down. The protagonist approaches the young gentleman and asks if she has a fever. He asks if she feels anything wrong. The lady replies that she wouldn't say she's sick. Karen asks what's wrong with her abilities and wonders if her wounds don't heal quickly. She explains that she doesn't usually get this upset and believes he, the young master, is a special case. Lumina explains that when she uses his powers on herself, she feels strange. She feels more pain than usual, colder and clammier. He says it's because she took his wounds, of course. The girl asks if he saw it. The guy is surprised and wonders how she can say such a thing after how she cried in pain. Hearing this, the girl doesn't understand why he's so angry. She also wonders if there's more compassion in him than he's letting on. The main character reflects on the fact that he simply can't bear to see someone in pain in front of him. She believes that for Karen, she's merely a means by which he can ward off his annoying admirer, Aravel. The young lady believes she's just a tool to be used without emotion. She thinks he should be glad she bore the wounds. Lumina asks if he was worried. When she sees that he looks surprised but doesn't answer, she says he must have been worried because the towel is still damp. She claims he was worried about her because he was sitting there at such a late hour. The girl reports that the first time someone put a wet towel on her forehead was when she was sick. Then she says she's always wondered what it feels like, and it turns out it's cold, and she laughs. The young gentleman asks what's so funny. The heroine says she's happy because he was there when she was hurt. Then she thanks him. Karen suggests getting back to business. Then she asks if she knows what it is. The young lady replies that it's a flower, and it's a cute little white one. He says she coughed it up. The girl is surprised to hear this. The boy insists it came from her mouth. Karen говорит, что it's unlikely she was so hungry that she decided to eat the flowers. Then she asks if there's any idea where it came from. The girl replies that she has no idea. The young gentleman claims she coughed up more than one, so he handed the rest over to the doctor. He says that if he's not a charlatan, he should find out what's going on. The boy tells the girl to rest now because he's going to call the doctor. The surprised woman asks if it's nighttime. He asks what's wrong, and the little girl replies that the doctor needs to sleep too. Lumina suggests the guy lie down next to her. Hearing this, he tells her to get a good night's sleep first, and then they'll think about it. The guy lay down in bed and asked if he should lie down there. The main character explains that he also looks tired and thinks it would be nice to sleep, and then decide what to do next. The young lady informed him that the bed was wide enough, so there shouldn't be any problems. and then she thought that if she could, she would send him to another room. But since the Duke had vacated their original room, she would have to share this one with Karen. Therefore, she understood that for now he could only stay here. Karen asks who Endymion is. Upon hearing this name, the girl asks why he said it. The guy asks if she knows him. Meanwhile, the protagonist doesn't understand why he suddenly started talking about Endymion, and she reflects on the fact that, unlike Lucius, who knows everything about her, right down to her Aunt Tu's cousin's grandfather, she believes Karen knows nothing at all about her family. Lumina knows that since they don't get along, he's probably never heard of her. Karen asks if this guy is bad and wonders if he was hers or something. The girl objects and says he's not a bad person at all, but a very good one. The guy asks if she likes him. She replies that, of course, she likes him. And then she thinks about how they don't understand what's so obvious about it. The main character believes that in the Lanches family, it's normal to love two people at the same time. She says that Endymion is her younger brother. The guy tells the girl to go to bed quickly, since her fever hasn't gone down yet. Then he tells her to keep calling him by his first name, since she knows him. Karen claims she's saying she likes him, and asks if she knows the name of the person she likes. She replies that, of course she knows his name is Karen von Hart. He says she's right, and then claims her name is Lumina von Hart. The boy explained that the Hart family had enjoyed robust health and was free of illness for generations. Therefore, he told her not to get sick without his permission. At this point, the girl realized he had blushed even more deeply. The young gentleman suggests that the girl stop chatting and lie down and rest, as her temperature may rise. Hearing this, the main character realized she'd been thinking about this since their first meeting, but she felt he wasn't being honest with her at all, and she thought the only person with a fever right now was him. When the young master woke up, he thought that he had already morning. He doesn't understand how it happened, because he just closed his eyes and it's already light in the room. The boy thought it was impossible, since his mother had died in this mansion. He still couldn't believe how he'd managed to sleep so soundly, and when he looked at the sleeping girl, he thought about how she always made him nervous. The doctor came to examine the girl and said she was feeling much better than she had been yesterday. He also believed they were healing well. However, he still said she should focus on recovery and rest. Karen tells the girl that she must have slept longer than usual because she was tired. She explains that she usually sleeps a lot. The young master says he thinks she's hungry and decided to eat the flowers. He then turns to the maid and tells her to hurry up and prepare the food. Hearing this, the main character thought that she had never eaten flowers and did not understand where he got it from. But when she saw the flowers, she thought that they remained in their original form. Karen reports that she said it was a secret hidden, even from the imperial family. Then she asks the girl what's wrong with her, and wonders what would happen if someone learned of her abilities and kidnapped her, and who would protect her then. Lumina says that in that case he'll help her and points at the guy. He asks, surprised, why he should help her. Then she tells him that he doesn't like her at all. The young lady claims to be his wife. She says that since something is wrong with her, he wonders if it's not natural to help her. Karen asks if she breaks her ankle, she'll stand on it fearlessly. The young lady replies that sometimes people think she's some kind of porcelain doll. Then she opens the window, finding the room too stuffy. And the main character says that even if it's raining outside, the room needs to be aired out. She calls the guy to come over to her. He asks what she saw. The girl says that although this rainbow is small, it's as beautiful as a picture. The young gentleman replies that it's just a rainbow. Hearing this, she asks, surprised, why he said just a rainbow, because she thinks it can only be seen now. Karen says that even if the clouds gather, it doesn't change the fact that the sky is blue, and the darkness is only a moment. The girl is sure that this rainbow is very beautiful, and the guy agrees with her. The mate informs the captain that the rain has stopped. He says he already knows. Brendan says he came to talk about my lady. The master asks if he found anything about Lumina. The assistant explains that he's been watching from the sidelines the whole time, but Milady has no connection to the doctor. He asks why. Brendan explains that she saw him before her, but it seems she doesn't know him, because he believes a legionnaire with such unique abilities is highly valued by the doctors. The assistant says that if they learn about the abilities they had 6 years ago, they might commit another mad act. The master says that then he too will do one mad thing in order to catch this man. The doctor was obsessed with the legionnaires, so 6 years ago he kidnapped Iris and Karen. Even though Iris was an ordinary human, she fell into the doctor's hands because she was with Karen at the time. And remembering the Count's past, his heart, which had seemed so numb, shatters into a million pieces. The assistant turns to the captain and informs him that there is a matter he needs to know. Brendan says that last time they performed a covenant ceremony together using ancient magic. He says he doesn't know if he understood correctly, but last time the Lumina disappeared, and he thinks she went to Karen. The gentleman asks if they're both home now, and also inquires about their condition. The assistant reports that Karen was not only fine but also full of energy. However, the girl fainted again, and Karen carried her in his arms. And, fortunately, she's fine now. He believes that her body obviously can't handle the strain of using her abilities. Von Hart tells his assistant to call Olivia and says he'll have to go back. At this point, Karen asks the girl what she's talking about and claims this is his room. The young lady objects and explains that, more precisely, this room is his and hers, and that means theirs. Hearing this, he asks, surprised, how this happened. Lumina explains that it's because they got married, and says it doesn't matter anyway since the bed is wide, and she thinks 10 people could sleep on it. And then she says that, besides, they slept together yesterday. Hearing this, the boy became embarrassed. The girl looked at his reaction and thought that he really did hate her. Suddenly, they heard someone knocking on the door, and the young gentleman wondered who was disturbing them at such a late hour. Hannah entered the room and told the young gentleman it was time for Milady to change. Then she asked the Duke if he would like to stay. Hearing this, the young master immediately left the room. The maid said she was so glad Karen left so easily. The girl said that, given what was said, most people would have left immediately. Lumina asks where anyone has ever seen a maid look the Duke in the eye. Then she reveals that he makes no secret of his identity. Hearing this, Brendan immediately transformed. Seeing this, the girl thought that she had already become accustomed to all his transformations. And she thought that since he had deliberately come to her at such an hour, it could only mean one thing. The restriction imposed on him by the doctor was temporary. Until today. And the main character understands that tonight at midnight, Brendan's fate will be decided. The assistant says that when Milady went out today, she suddenly disappeared. And then he says he thinks Ash was very surprised. The main character thought that only 2 people close to Lucius knew about the contract between her and the Duke. Brendan says he's so shy he can't show it. Then he tells her that when she sees him, she should say she's fine. The young lady agrees. The gentleman says Ash is the second treasure in his life. She asks who's first. He replies, naturally, Olivia. And the day she agreed to marry him was the brightest day of her life, and she confessed her feelings to someone like him. And so he believes that at that moment, no one was happier than him. The protagonist asks if he shouldn't be with Olivia now. He replies that he can't because his wife will be sad when he dies, and he doesn't want to make her sad. Hearing this, Lumina realized Brendan truly loved his family. He almost died when the doctor poisoned him, but the Erica medicine was able to slow the poison's effects. However, the medicine had side effects, and he was in great distress. Although he seemed to accept them calmly, he was only able to survive because he wanted to be with his family. However, he understands that the time limit set by the doctor will come to an end. And so, today's situation is different from his previous life, when he was forced to die helplessly. The main character thought they had a chance to save Brendan, and she was immensely happy because she saw that he hadn't changed at all. The young lady says the man won't be able to make Olivia cry. Hearing this, he smiles and says he's lost. He then informs the girl that he will become her subordinate. Brendan says that if she wants to betray the captain, he won't do it. The girl asks how much she respects him. The assistant explains that the doctor kidnapped him because of his unique abilities, and the man who pulled him out of this living hell was the captain. And then he explains that's why he will never hand him over. The assistant tells the girl to be wary of the doctor. He explains that he's obsessed with Legionnaires. If he finds out about her, he'll torment her. The gentleman asks if she wants to be experimented on. Brendan transforms into a doctor and tells the girl that if she sees this face, she should run without thinking. Meanwhile, at Lambron's imperial castle, the girl asks her brother if he's feeling better. When he sees Belle, he asks if she's been here all this time. Elliot Lambrana, the second prince. The girl turns to her brother and insists that now is not the time to read a book. Then she tells him that Karen has married this time, and she can't remember his wife's name. The princess says that she is definitely from a family she has never heard of, and asks her brother if he thinks Karen acted wisely. Elliot says he's very sorry her beloved Duke got married. Hearing this, the girl asks him what nonsense he's talking about. He asks, surprised, why she's angry. The princess reports that things have become more complicated now, and she, as Arabelle Fiage, from the royal family, was about to marry a man who married a low-born girl, and then claims she'll never admit it. The princess had gotten everything she wanted her entire life, whether it was a thing or a person, and she believed that Duke Hart's only son was a Legionnaire, and she thought a man like him was simply destined to be with her. Aravel says she never imagined this girl would snatch him away. The prince tells Belle he understands she's upset and informs her that even her father has given his permission for this marriage, and he asks what they can do then. The lady says the problem lies with her father too, since he summoned Duke Hart to his office. But after looking at him, he simply remained silent. Worse yet, her father said he didn't want to interfere in her personal affairs. The princess says that no matter how great Duke Hart is, he's not an emperor, and she believes that if this clingy girl did something wrong, she won't be able to go unpunished. Elliot reports that Duke Hart is one of the most cold-blooded men, and he not only killed numerous legionnaires, but also his father and wife. Legionnaires don't fear for human lives, so his father is cautious around him. The princess says the rumor that he killed his wife is just a rumor. However, his brother objects and says he doesn't think it's entirely false. The prince asks if she's ever spoken to Marcel. She tells him not to mention her older brother. He asks if the Duke is the only suitable match for her. Then he says she's still young and therefore doesn't think she should rush. Aravel says she's never heard anything more stupid and thinks it only irritates her. And then she thinks that compared to her second brother, it sounds really nice. Her brother says that if she really likes him so much, they'll figure out what to do. At this point, the protagonist thought about how everyone was telling her to avoid her flawed yet another prince. And after one incident with Elliot, she began hearing such words more often. After this incident, even his now deceased mother changed her attitude and turned away from him. His situation worsened significantly, although that's natural. But the girl believes that for her, Elliot is the only one who treats her like an ordinary person, even though she's the only legionnaire in the world. The prince says something strange, that the Duke is underage and therefore believes there's no need to rush the wedding. Hearing this, the sister says it's true and absurd. After all, this little girl seemed a little cheeky and sweet, but nothing more. Elliot asks what the name of the Tunicom is that Duke Hart married. She replies that it's Lumina, Lance's. Hearing this, the boy thought that his sister was only pretending not to remember all the details about her. At that moment, the princess thought that she was much better than her. The prince says his sister knows little about this lady. She agrees. The boy asks why he doesn't introduce her into his circle. Once the room issue was somewhat resolved, Karen stopped trying to run away from home. As a result, they began seeing each other more often. Once, he even gave her flowers. At this point, the main character thought about how he often did unexpected things. Then she asked why he suddenly gave her flowers. The Duke explains that he picked them up. The girl is surprised to hear this, then says that they are flowers from the Duke's garden. The maid says that many flowers have been blooming lately. Hearing this, Lumina asks if it's true. Then she says she wants to see them. Hannah says that since her body has recovered, they can go for a walk. She then says she'll prepare everything for this walk now. Within minutes, the protagonist was already in the garden and thought it was a good thing she had come out. The scent of the flowers was so sweet and she felt so calm. However, she was worried that the gentleman was acting like a stranger, despite making it clear he didn't want to. Yet he was still strolling with her. The girl looked at the maid, who was smiling all the time, and thought that she understood everything at once. Lumina thought Karen was very much like a stray cat. If she approached him first, he'd immediately run away. And she believed that if she didn't pretend not to see him, he'd immediately approach. The girl thought about how it was all just like now, and she thinks she could have asked him out for a walk, but he's still wary of her, and if she shows that she sees him, he might run away. The young lady asks the gentleman if he went to pick up flowers while she was sleeping. She also wonders why he didn't just wake her, and they went together. At that moment, she thinks he's caring for a sick woman and admiring the flowers, but he's more sentimental than he seems. Karen asks what kind of nonsense she's talking about. He says he's here to find out if she ate the flowers. He thinks it was a mistake to come. Hearing this, the main character thought about how he was a legionnaire, and legionnaires were unfeeling, and so she retracted everything she had said earlier. The girl claims she's never eaten flowers before, but they have something edible. He asks what it is. The young lady says he can put the other end of the flower to his mouth and do the same. The boy, surprised, says she said she didn't eat them, but he just did. The lady explains it's just sucking out the honey. Then she offers the boy a try and blows the flower into his mouth. Lumina looked at the boy, curious why he was doing what he was told. Then she asked if the honey was tasty. He thought it was sweet and not bad. Then she asked the girl if she was eating flowers because she had no money. The girl was surprised to hear this, and he explained that nobles didn't usually place flowers in their mouths that way. She claimed that, regardless of the Lanches family's wealth, she had done so several times as a child. Karen insists she's still a child. The girl counters. explaining that she did that when she was younger. And she's talking about a time when she was even younger than she is now, and when her stepmother was still alive. The girl recalls that her stepmother accused her of lying today too, and she was picky about absolutely every little thing. The woman told the maids that this girl would be flogged and ordered that they bring her something suitable. Then she ordered that Lumina not be given anything to eat today. At this point, the little girl realized that fasting during the day was no big deal to her, and she always hugged herself at night, as she had to endure the night of hunger and cold. One evening, when the window was open, she smelled something sweet, and she wondered where it was coming from. The main character says that when a person is very hungry, they simply cannot think rationally, and Spamanayat that at that moment, even a drop of honey was enough to bring tears to her eyes. When the girl tasted the flower, she thought about how sweet she'd tasted it back then, and then she realized that, tasting it now, the flavor wasn't as intense. The young gentleman looked at the young lady, confused as to why she suddenly had that expression. She asked if he would be leaving soon, and at that moment, she thought about how, for some reason, he was diligently staying home, but believed he would soon be leaving again. The girl understands that Karen hates her father, Lucius, and believes this place belongs to the Grand Duke. She says she understands him. The main character says that when you're on the brink of death, you wonder if one person will be calm, eat, and live well, and yet you hate that person so much that you won't be able to sleep a wink. Lumina Gavarichto, it doesn't matter whether it's a misunderstanding or not. Hostility is hostility, and at that moment she thought that while Lucius is someone she can trust, she wonders if she can convince Karen of that, because the young lady doesn't want to come between them, because that wasn't in the contract. Then she turns to the boy and tells him not to let himself be hurt, and asks who injured him last time, and also wonders who this legionnaire is who's getting beat up by everyone. Hearing this, the boy thought it was absurd, and that he was lucky to find people who weren't afraid of the legionnaires. However, he wondered who was advising him to escape the beatings. He thought it would be best to ignore her words. Karen remembered that when the girl was lying unconscious on the bed, she couldn't take care of herself, and she told him that he should never allow himself to be beaten, and that he shouldn't even dare to be hit without her permission. The young gentleman thought about how he'd seen several of them when she first used her powers on him. He also wondered who had hit her while she was in the house. The Duke says that if that's why she's afraid to go home, she should tell him and he'll sort it out right now. Then he asks who the bastard was who hit her, and he thinks that whoever it was, he'll kill him. The girl asks if he's talking about the wounds she suffered using her powers. She says she doesn't remember them being there recently. Hearing this, he wonders if he's the culprit. Lumina looked at the boy and said he was being a bit stupid, and then she thought about how surprisingly conscientious he was as a legionnaire. Then she told him not to worry about her, because the time would come when no one would be able to help him. The young lady says that he should definitely think about her then, and then she will immediately find her. After a walk in the garden, she spent time with Karen every day. While drinking tea, he asked her if she was considering divorcing him right away. Hearing this, the main character thought about how often he brings up the subject of divorce, and she feels it's impossible to understand what the legionnaire is really thinking. She dismisses it as just adolescence. The young gentleman says that when they grow up, he knows they'll get divorced. She asks what will happen next. The guy says he wants her to leave this house right now. Hearing this, the girl was surprised, because she could not even imagine that he wanted this. Karen informs her that he intends to legally dissolve the imperial family, and therefore advises her not to worry. The girl thought that she would be immediately kicked out. She also understands that an early divorce would be a breach of contract. This means there will be no legal consequences. Lumina stands up and, jumping up, objects. She insists they should never get divorced, because she believes such a stain on her reputation won't be left on her. The girl, screaming, tells him never to mention divorce again, and asks if he understands that. At this point, the guy, surprised, realized that he couldn't leave things as they were. He offered to listen to the girl and informed her that they couldn't get a divorce right now due to legal reasons. And then he says he believes with all his heart that he can finish her off, and he believes that if not today, then that day could come tomorrow. The young gentleman claims he's warned her repeatedly and asks why she refuses to listen to his words. The girl understands that if she divorces him now, she won't get paid. However, she can't say this. So she tells the guy that she likes him. Karen wondered what was so good about him. The young lady thought he didn't believe her and thought she needed to come up with something. Convincing him wasn't as easy as she'd hoped, as she hadn't expected such a question at all. Lumina Dolga, she didn't think so. And then she says he has a beautiful face, Hearing this, the guy is surprised, and she thinks that she doesn't understand what she should do, since she thinks that if she says she's in love with him, he might. The young gentleman said that it meant that when someone more handsome than him came along, she would divorce him and marry him. The girl thought he believed her. The guy insists there's something else too. The young lady asks him if he knows that when you fall in love, the world takes on new colors. And he says that the moment she met him, she felt the whole world become more beautiful. Lumina claims that after meeting him, the night disappeared from her world, and then asks if she wants to break up with him. And at that moment, she thinks she's a fool who doesn't know love. Karen said he understood and suggested the girl stop saying such things. And at that moment, she thought everything had gone well. Suddenly, a maid comes into the room and addresses Milady. The young lady asks if something is urgent. She says Princess Aravel sent a man to her, and he asked her to deliver this letter to the lady. Seeing this, the young lady thought it was an envelope with the imperial seal, meaning it was a time bomb. The young gentleman asked if they could look together. The main character announces that the organizer, Princess Arabelle, invites her to a tea party. When the girl came into the dressing room, she said that somehow, unexpectedly, her dressing room turned into a secret hideout. Brendan entered with his mistress and said he thought it was quite good. Meanwhile, he disguised himself as a maid. He explained that this was a place where the maid and my lady could safely be alone. The assistant says he was told she accepted Princess Arabelle's invitation. Then he claims she's ridiculously brave. He believes they would have met eventually, but he realizes it's best not to delay. Lumina thinks she might forget about her later, and she understands that. Knowing the princess's temperament, this tea party is meant to be a friendly encounter. After all, she believes that the upper crust rarely welcomes new people. The main character knows that such an event is actually attended by ladies and lords who haven't yet made their debut. And this event is aimed at demonstrating status and establishing hierarchy. The girl believes the princess must have missed something. After all, she, Lumina, is no longer a teenager. At this point, Brendan thought that what he'd seen so far would be met with at least 2 blows, and so he simply couldn't help but worry about what would happen at the princess's tea party. After all, he knew there wouldn't be a single person there on the girl's side. Brandon asks the girl if she needs a change of outfit. She replies that she needs to choose something, since the Duke recently bought her a bunch of new clothes, but she hasn't tried on most of them yet. The gentleman turns to Milady and claims there are no suitable clothes in this wardrobe. He then explains that Princess Arabelle's tea party resembles a battlefield. Therefore, he believes she should be better dressed than the child next door. Lumina thought about the child being Ash and asked if it was true. He replied that, of course, he was talking about him and claimed that she was the lady of this house, and that he was the captain's left hand, and his love was his right hand. Therefore, he believed they could call her their child. Brendan claims that my lady is now part of the Hart family and part of the Munez family. The main character heard this and wondered if he was serious, and then she'd have to send the captain an expense report. She also felt strange that she was part of the family, and at that moment, she couldn't understand why her heart was pounding so hard and trembling slightly. The Duke's assistant says he wants to talk about the flower she coughed up recently. Then he asks why she was scared. The girl asks why he suddenly started talking about a flower. He explains that he discreetly borrowed one and gave it to Erica because he thought she was more capable than an ordinary doctor. Hearing this, the main character wonders how he manages to do all this. She believes that, even without telling him anything, he's doing an excellent job because he's so capable. Brand reports that Erica was also thinking about it, but she wasn't sure, and she stayed up all night researching. And so he thinks she won't rest until she finds everything missing in their books. Hearing this, Lumina thought that now she could begin to implement her plan. After all, just recently she'd thought it was still a bit early, but apparently Erica's knowledge and enthusiasm exceeded her expectations. The girl asks the gentleman that the next time he goes to Erica, he can tell her about the new medicine that she wants to develop. The gentleman asks what this medicine is. The young lady replies that he will find out very soon. Then she explains that this is the first mission that only he can complete.